Robb Stark stood on the battlements of Riverrun, the cool autumn air biting at his cheeks, the quiet hum of 1,000 whispered thoughts drifting through his mind. Dawn had not yet broken, and in the faint gloom, the banners of the dire wolf hung limp. It was on these stones that he had received word of his father's execution. This was where he had stood, arms clenched, shoulders trembling with his grief, as the knowledge of Lord Eddard Stark's death washed over him like the waves of the sunset sea. He had felt an ache so profound in his soul that for a moment he could not move or speak. His father was gone, and the Iron Throne was in the hands of crueler men. That was the moment the boy in him died. That was the moment a king was born. They had hailed him king in the north. Lords, knights, men who pledged to follow him, who had seen Ned Stark's honor spat on by the Lannisters, demanded retribution. The great Jon had unsheathed his sword and cried out, "Why should we bend the knee to those who have spilt our blood and dishonored our dead? The king in the north." The echoes of that cry resounded through the hall, and each voice joined until the stone walls themselves seemed to ring with the chorus of the king in the north. The king in the north. Robb had stood at the head of the table, his dire wolf, Grey Wind, standing protectively at his side. He had only 19 years of life and was newly burdened with a crown of deadly seriousness, but in that moment the youth in him turned to steel. The choice had been made. No longer was he merely the eldest Stark boy, he was to lead the North's vengeance. But it was not just vengeance that stirred in him. Beyond grief, beyond the fury that raged like a fire in his chest, there was a sense of duty. His father had tried to protect the realm. Lord Eddard had sought a just and measured path, and for that he had lost his life. The realm was bleeding under the cruelty of Joffrey Baratheon, or Joffrey Lannister, as so many whispered, and it was now Robb's burden to fight for more than just the North's independence. He would not rest until his father's killers had been called to account. This was not just some baronial war waged for petty pride. A rot festered at the heart of King's Landing, a place where the very idea of honor was cast aside in favor of backroom deals, shifting alliances, and the madness of a boy king and his imperious mother. For weeks, he had advanced his army through the Riverlands, forging alliances and winning battles, Oxcross, the Whispering Wood, the Crag, each victory feeding his men's faith in him. At night, huddled in his tent, he sometimes felt the weight of it all pressing down upon his soul. So many men looked to him as their shining star amid the darkness. So many believed he could restore order, avenge treachery, topple a false king who wore the crown. Robb could not confess his uncertainties to them. He was king in the north, and a king must stand tall. He must command respect, confidence, and unwavering belief in his righteous cause. Only to his mother, Lady Catelyn, could he reveal even the slightest crack in his armor. Only to her could he admit, in hushed words, how the fear for his sisters gnawed at him, how the memory of his father's eyes haunted him. But though Lady Catelyn allowed him a moment's vulnerability, she always responded with steady resolve and encouragement. She too bore the grief for her husband, and she harnessed that sorrow as fuel for her convictions. Whenever Robb voiced the slightest flicker of doubt, she held his face between her hands and reminded him, gently but firmly, that honor would guide him. He had marched south, systematically dismantling every host that tried to stop him. Tywin Lannister had scrambled to regroup, to protect the heart of his power in the Crownlands and to keep the boy king enthroned. But rumors flew like ravens in that time of chaos. Some said King Joffrey had grown more erratic since Ned Stark's beheading. Others whispered that Cersei Lannister had turned half the counselors at court into her puppets, strangling any dissenting voice. A quiet rumor, scarcely believed, suggested that Tyrion Lannister tried to restore some measure of sanity, urging caution in dealing with the Northmen. But the cracks in the Lannister hold on King's Landing could be felt by every bannerman who rode beneath the Wolf's banner. The North saw opportunity amid that disorder and disunity. When the moment came at last, when it was clear that to break the Lannister hold on King's Landing would be to tear out the heart of their power, Robb settled his eyes on the grander prize, to take the capital itself. For generations, no northern army had taken King's Landing. It was a fortress of intrigues, guarded by the Red Keep and the might of the crown. Many doubted the possibility. Lords from the Riverlands, too, advised caution. But then came the news that Stannis Baratheon had lost on the Blackwater, his fleet destroyed, his allies scattered, and the city was left in an exhausted state. The cost to defend King's Landing from Stannis had been great, and the Lannisters were now pressed to the brink. If ever there were a chance for the North to strike at the seat of power, it was now. So they marched. Robb's host, battle-hardened and flush with victory, advanced with purposeful strides down the King's Road. The Outriders saw disorganized pockets of resistance. Lannister lords, forced to split themselves to confront threats on multiple fronts, were unable to muster a proper defense in time. The hills and fields parted before the dire wolf banners, and peasants stood by the roadsides, jaws slack, as the largest northern army in recent memory emerged from the morning mists. Some villagers cheered, hoping that any new conqueror might be more benevolent than the last. Others cowered, uncertain of these grim-faced men riding under the stark sigil. But every day it seemed more certain that the tide of fortune had turned. They drew close enough to see the high walls and towers of the capital, and Robb rode near the front lines, flanked by Grey Wind and a select guard of loyal men. Lord Roose Bolton was among the retinue, as was the great John Umber, Ricard Karstark, and Edmure Tully, who had at last joined his nephew after securing Riverrun's defense. Lady Catelyn traveled with them but remained behind the vanguard, riding in a carriage with guards, anxious for her son's safety but adamant that she see the endeavor through to its end. Robb listened to his lord's counsel. Some insisted they should try to starve the city, lay siege until the gates were forced open. Others wished to strike quickly, taking advantage of any confusion before the Lannisters could rally. They had heard that the defenders were led by an erratic boy-king known more for cruelty than cunning, and that the crown's forces might lack the discipline to repel a ferocious assault. The morning arrived, mild for that region, and Robb ordered his men to set their banners in sight of the walls. Their war horns sounded across the fields, loud and piercing, a herald of the north. They saw small pockets of gold cloaks scrambling along the ramparts, archers setting up positions, and the last-minute attempts at reinforcement. For many of the men, a sense of awe seized them. King's Landing was a place of legends of Aegon's conquest, of Targaryen kings, and now a place that might soon see the ascendance of a northern dynasty. Robb himself felt the tension coil tight in his stomach. He had fought battles before, he had risked his life against the Lannisters, had outmaneuvered them at the Whispering Wood, had claimed victory after victory, but this was different. This was the seat of the Iron Throne, the city in whose streets his father had walked, the place where his sisters were rumored to be. The specter of Ned Stark's execution, performed before a jeering crowd, gnawed at Robb. If they succeed, if they took the city, he would do so in the name of honor, to restore justice. And perhaps in that triumph he might find a measure of peace. They made camp in preparation for a siege, the tents laid out in a formation that blocked any major exit from the city except by ship. Word arrived by secret messenger that the royal fleet was still battered and short of supplies, trophies of the Blackwater battle. So perhaps the Lannisters could not count on the sea to save them. Over the course of 3 days, Robb's men tested the city's defenses. He sent small cavalry forces to probe the gates, archers to pepper the ramparts. Each time, they withdrew before sustaining heavy losses. The gold cloaks were numerous, but it was easy to see how uncertain they were. The city was tired, hungry. Its defenders were forced into exhaustion day after day. Tyrion Lannister, rumored to hold a position of authority within the walls, was said to be quick-witted but short on men and short on morale. The king in the north bided his time, waiting to see if a parley was possible. On the morning of the 4th day, the gates of King's Landing opened just wide enough for a lone rider to pass through. He wore no house colors, only ragged clothes stained by travel. In his hands was a small banner of truce, thin, dirty cloth, fluttering in the wind. The man approached Robb's camp cautiously, trembling at the hundreds of spears bristling in his direction. When finally admitted to the center of the encampment, he knelt before Robb, sweat beading on his forehead, and told him that the Queen Regent, Cersei Lannister, would deign to meet to discuss terms. Robb knew better than to trust her. But the notion of parley, even a faint one, was still tempting. If a negotiation could be forced, perhaps the city could be taken without the slaughter of innocents, without the bloodshed that might haunt the realm for generations. So, with utmost caution, he agreed. The parley was arranged on neutral ground, in a broad meadow just outside arrow range of the walls. Robb arrived mounted, clad in gray steel armor, the direwolf etched into his breastplate. Grey Wind padded beside him, hackles slightly raised, sniffing the air. Roose Bolton and the great Jon were at his flanks, half a dozen archers hidden in the tall grass behind them, bows at the ready should any betrayal occur. From the city came a small retinue, gold cloaks making a half-circle. In the center was a lithe woman with emerald eyes, hair the color of spun gold, her expression haughty and cold. Cersei Lannister. By her side stood her brother, Tyrion, who looked distinctly less assured. A nervous energy clung to him as if he realized how precarious the situation was. Robb dismounted and stood tall, chest tight but resolved. This was his first direct confrontation with the woman who had orchestrated his father's downfall. She offered a thin, empty smile and inclined her head. Her voice, when she spoke, was sweet and venomous. She expressed her regret at Lord Eddard's passing in the same way one might regret a fly's death underfoot. Robb felt fury flare hot in his chest, but he kept his composure, recalling the lessons of diplomacy that his father and mother had tried to teach him. A single rash move could cost him everything. Cersei demanded that Robb withdraw his forces at once. She attempted to sweeten the demand with talk of a truce, of recognition of the North's autonomy, of certain concessions that might be made if he would only end this war. She offered back Sansa Stark of Arya. She seemed to know little or said she did not. Robb tried to read her face for any sign of deception, but her mask was near impenetrable. Tyrion spoke next, bridging the gap between them with more sincerity than his sister. He insisted that war served no one's interests, that King's Landing had suffered too greatly from siege and bloodshed, and that perhaps a solution could be found if the king in the north proved willing to compromise. But behind the halfman's measured words, Robb sensed desperation. The city's defenders were not confident. Robb's response was swift and strong. The only acceptable conclusion was the surrender of King's Landing, the removal of Joffrey Baratheon from the Iron Throne, and justice for the murder of Eddard Stark. "Honor compels me," Robb said, his voice firm, carrying across the meadow. "You ask me to abandon my father's memory, my sister's fate, and the men who have bled for this cause. You ask me to overlook a false king who sits upon the throne my father died trying to protect from tyranny. I will not do it." The wind tugged at his cloak, at the wolf's head embroidered there, and he felt the glow of conviction in his chest, the memory of his father's unwavering honor. At that, Cersei's lovely face twisted, revealing a glimpse of her hatred. She said that if he meant to take the city, the blood of thousands would stain his hands. She looked past him to the great Jon and Rickard Karstark, and then at the men arrayed around them. Her words dripped with scorn. "You call this boy a king? He's no better than the traitor who sired him." Robb's pulse hammered at his temples, and the great Jon let out a growl, his hand straying to his sword. But Robb gave no signal, made no outward show of anger. He knew that to lose composure here was to play into her hands. They parted with no resolution. Robb returned to his camp determined. If King's Landing would not surrender peacefully, then the walls would have to be breached. Even so, he gave one more day for the city's defenders to reconsider, sending word that he would accept their surrender with minimal bloodshed if they yielded. No response came. By dawn of the next day, all signs pointed to war. Robb ordered siege towers to be prepared, catapults to be moved into position. His men sharpened their blades, readied their bows and spears. The crows began to circle above as if anticipating the carnage to come. Lady Catelyn paced near the command tent, eyes haunted by worry for her son and for the daughters still lost within those walls. When Robb gave the signal, the horns rang out and the northern army advanced across the fields. The gold cloaks peppered them with arrows. Some men fell, crying out as shafts found armor gaps, but the momentum of the assault did not wane. The great Jon roared commands to push forward the siege engines, and grapnels were thrown toward the walls, hooking onto crenellations. Bolts from scorpions rained down, snapping siege equipment, killing horses, and sending men screaming beneath the crashing weight. But with grim determination, the Northerners pressed on. The smell of pitch and burning oil drifted through the air, reminding Robb uncomfortably of the tales he had heard of Stannis' attack on the Blackwater. He prayed that the Lannisters had exhausted their supply of wildfire. To lose so many men in a conflagration would be a tragedy beyond measure. Some segments of the wall proved weaker than others. Robb's scouts had pinpointed areas that had been damaged by the earlier siege. Catapults lobbed great stones that shattered battlements and sent defenders toppling. Slowly, methodically, ladders rose and men clambered up them, brandishing swords and axes, forging a foothold. It was brutal, close-quarters fighting on the walls, steel scraping steel, the screams of the dying mingling with the clangor of swords. Robb, clad in his armor and astride a warhorse, did not simply watch from afar. Though he left the direct assault on the walls to his more experienced captains, he rode among his troops, ensuring that the second wave was ready to charge if a gate was seized. Gray wind bounded along the perimeter, his lips pulled back from his teeth in a silent snarl, as if eager for any threat that might come his king's way. At last, to the west of the King's Gate, the Greyjohn's men succeeded in wrenching open a postern gate that had been poorly reinforced. Cheers rang out as the Northerners poured in, surging onto the streets of King's Landing. Robb spurred his horse forward, leading the cavalry in a rolling wave of steel. The gold cloaks who stood in their way fought desperately, but many threw down their weapons, unwilling to die for a king they barely respected or for the queen they feared. The city quickly became a battlefield of twisting alleyways and narrow cobblestone streets. Fires sprang up in the chaos, and the wails of terrified small folk resonated above the din. Robb's priority, repeated to all his men, was to minimize unnecessary slaughter. "We are not butchers," he had told them. "We come for justice, not for the blood of the innocent." But in the fury of battle it was impossible to protect every life. Still, he urged his captains to show restraint whenever they could. Bit by bit, the Northmen fought their way toward the Red Keep, that looming fortress of crimson stone perched above the city like an arrogant overlord. The gold cloaks regrouped, forming barricades in the narrower streets, hoping to bottle up the attackers. The Lannister guards, household knights, many wearing crimson cloaks, rallied in a final show of defiance. But with every passing hour, more of King's Landing fell under northern control. The men chanted Robb's name, some of them shouting, "The king in the north," in the city squares. It was a clash of spears, the ring of swords, the desperate shrieks of men cornered in alleyways. Bodies littered the ground, and the stench of death began to set in. But Robb's host was well commanded and disciplined, pushing onward like an inexorable tide. Overhead, the sky grew heavy with acrid smoke. By late afternoon, they had encircled the Red Keep, the last bastion of Lannister power in the city. The castle's thick walls had withstood the test of centuries, but now they bristled with defenders who seemed exhausted, morale crumbling under the unstoppable weight of the invaders. Robb halted his men just out of arrow range and called out to the defenders on the walls, offering them one final chance to surrender. He knew some might accept, for none could doubt the city was lost. His voice rang out, "Throw down your arms and open the gates, and you shall live. Stand against us, and we shall show no mercy." For a moment, there was silence. Then, in a stark example of what fear can do, a few men on the walls took aim at those behind them, gold cloaks turning their bows and swords against the more loyal Lannister knights, as if to force a surrender. A scuffle broke out and the gates were thrown wide, swinging open on groaning hinges. Shouts erupted, some calling for quarter, others for a last stand. Chaos reigned. Robb seized the moment. He signaled his cavalry to advance, leading them straight toward the open gate. It was a perilous charge. Any moment, the defenders might drop a portcullis or rally a volley of arrows, but the advantage was with the king in the north. The defenders were hopelessly divided. Once through the gate, they found themselves in the outer yard of the Red Keep. Clusters of gold cloaks stood uncertainly, some kneeling to surrender, some still brandishing weapons. Without hesitation, Robb and his men disarmed the ones who yielded. The clang of steel against stone rang through the courtyard. The smell of blood and fear mingled with the sweat of horses. Robb dismounted, Grey Wind beside him, and gave orders to secure the keep's corridors. He wanted no wanton pillaging here, no savage looting. This place, for all its sins, was where the realm was governed. He meant to set an example for his men, for the realm, and for himself. As the northern soldiers fanned out, subduing remaining pockets of resistance, Robb advanced deeper into the Red Keep, his heart pounding. He did not know if Joffrey was still within these walls or if Cersei had retreated to some hidden chamber. The hush of the corridors felt ominous. Occasionally they heard the clash of steel from an adjoining hallway or a scream echo through the stone. In the grand throne room, the columns soared to a vaulted ceiling and stained glass windows cast fractured light across the floor. The Iron Throne stood at the far end, a twisted, hulking mass of swords taken from old conquests, hammered together and sharpened into a seat of power. Robb paused in the great doors. He saw that the hall was empty but for a few scattered defenders. They looked up in terror at the sight of the Wolf King. Most dropped their swords and fell to their knees. Grey Wind let out a low growl. The Iron Throne loomed above them, a monstrous structure that seemed to glare in silent challenge at the young king who had breached its domain. Footsteps echoed behind Robb. He turned to see the Great John leading a handful of men. Their expressions were alight with the thrill of victory but also caution. "Where's Joffrey?" the Great John rumbled, voice echoing in the cavernous hall. Before anyone could speak, another voice answered, ringing out from behind a column. A figure stepped forth, a small man with mismatched eyes, an expression of exhausted resignation. Tyrion Lannister. His finery was smeared with grime and blood. Hands raised in a gesture of surrender, he bowed his head slightly, but there was a bitter smile on his lips. "Your Grace," Tyrion said in a tired rasp. "The city is yours. I only ask that you show mercy to those who remain." Robb nodded curtly. "Where are the boy king and the queen?" At that, Tyrion sighed. "My nephew is somewhere within these walls, presumably. Last I saw him, he was shrieking at the gold cloaks to defend him or face his wrath. My sister. She's caged herself in Maegor's holdfast, I imagine, with her personal guard." He lifted his gaze to meet Robb's. "I implore you, my lord, my king, try to spare the small folk what further suffering you can. The city has seen enough blood these last months." Robb studied him, uncertain what measure of trust to give this man who wore the colors of House Lannister. Yet Tyrion's voice carried a sincerity that couldn't be wholly feigned. Lady Catelyn had once spoken of Tyrion Lannister with reluctant respect for his intellect, though she had never fully forgiven him for his family's trespasses. Robb nodded again. "Where are my sisters?" he demanded, and the echo of those words in the throne room made his throat tighten. His mind conjured an image of Sansa trapped at court, Arya lost and alone. He had only rumors to guide him. Tyrion's face twitched with something resembling sympathy. Sansa was kept in royal chambers for a time. The last I saw her, she was at the mercy of the Queen's retinue. Arya? I cannot say. She vanished around the time of Lord Eddard's death. Some say she escaped the city. Some say the gold cloaks might have taken her, but I've found no confirmation. He paused, glancing to the Iron Throne as if the seat of power had inflicted some personal torment on him. If Sansa still lives, and I believe she does, my sister will keep her close as a hostage. A murmur of anger rippled through the northern men. Robb turned to the great Jon. "Secure Maegor's holdfast," he ordered. "Take the men you need. Free my sister. Bring me Joffrey Baratheon if you find him. Alive." They would require the Boy King's presence for a proper reckoning, for justice to be administered. The great Jon grinned a fierce, wolfish grin and barked commands to his men. They clattered away down the corridors, swords drawn. Robb faced Tyrion again, posture rigid, every nerve keyed up with the knowledge that at any moment an arrow or a blade could flash from the shadows. "You surrendered," Robb said. "Yet you are a Lannister. Why?" Tyrion offered a wry twist of the mouth. "I've tried to keep some semblance of sanity in the city. My name might be Lannister, but that doesn't mean I wish for more needless bloodshed." His tone was edged with bitterness. "I'll accept my fate, whatever you decide. If there's a trial, I only ask that I be allowed to speak in my defense." Robb's gaze flickered to the Iron Throne. How many have been judged in its shadow, fairly or otherwise? He thought of his father kneeling there, accused of treason, and the vile farce that had led to his beheading. "I believe in justice, Lord Tyrion," Robb said. "You shall have your chance to speak. For now, you will be kept under guard. Resist, and you die." Tyrion did not protest. Two northern guards stepped forward, their grips firm on his arms, though they did not mistreat him. At that moment, a flurry of footsteps erupted at the throne room's entrance. A handful of Lannister retainers stumbled in, fear bright in their eyes, as northern soldiers swarmed around them. The group parted, revealing Joffrey Baratheon, his golden hair tangled, his royal robes torn and stained with grime. A bruise marred his cheek, and his eyes darted around like those of a cornered animal. Behind him, the great Jon shoved a disarmed Kingsguard knight forward. "I found the boy cowering in an antechamber, Your Grace," he said with a bark of laughter. He was shouting at his men to fight harder. Problem is, they didn't seem eager to die for him. Joffrey's face twisted. Even amid the terror, his arrogance burst forth. "Unhand me, you northern curs," he shrilled, voice cracking. "I am your king. My grandfather will have your heads. I'll put all of you to the sword." Spittle flecked his lips, and he looked around as if someone might leap to his aid. Grey Wind snarled, inching forward, the large dire wolf's teeth bared. Joffrey's bravado wavered at the sight. He recoiled, face going pale. Robb approached, steel armor clinking, his eyes fixed on the Boy King who had ordered his father's execution. There was a moment, tense, silent, where all the rage Robb had carried for months threatened to break free. He imagined running Joffrey through right then, avenging Ned Stark's murder. But he stayed his hand. A single, swift death would be too simple, too easy for Joffrey. The realm deserved more than that. "You are no king," Robb said, voice measured. "You're a usurper and a murderer, and you will answer for your crimes." Joffrey tried to lunge, or perhaps just flinch away, but the great Jon's massive hand clamped on his shoulder, keeping him in place. The Boy King spat, cursing, tears welling in his eyes as he realized the depth of his peril. The great Jon shoved him forward, and he nearly toppled, only to catch himself on a fallen sword. He looked at that blade for a moment, but even he understood that picking it up would lead to a quick end. The great Jon turned to Robb. "He's yours, my king," he said, giving Joffrey another rough push. "We've also found the queen. She barricaded herself in her chambers, but it didn't take us long to break through." As if on cue, another group of Northmen entered, ushering in Queen Cersei. She wore a lavish gown torn by some scuffle, her golden hair disheveled, eyes blazing with anger. At her side, Sansa Stark walked, head bowed, tears in her eyes. A northern soldier hovered protectively near Sansa, blocking any harm from reaching her. Robb's heart twisted at the sight of his sister. She was thinner, her face drawn, as if every day in King's Landing had etched a new line of despair upon her. He wanted to run to her and clasp her in his arms, to promise her safety, but he kept himself composed for the moment. Cersei's voice rang out furious. "Release my son." Her gaze flicked over Robb Stark with venom. "If you harm him, I swear you will not leave the city alive." Robb stepped forward calmly. Your son is under arrest, he stated. As are you. The reign of House Lannister is ended. I'm here to restore justice, justice that was denied my father, and justice for all the realm that has suffered under the tyranny of your so-called king. He paused, letting the echo linger. The air was thick with tension, the hush so profound that one could hear the distant fires crackling outside. At last, Robb turned to Sansa. Sansa, are you hurt? Tears slipped down her cheeks. She lifted her gaze to his, eyes brimming with relief and sorrow. I'm all right now. They kept me as a hostage. They made me watch. She trailed off, trembling with the memory of her father's death. Without another word, Robb let his composure falter just a fraction, enough to wrap an arm around his sister. She buried her face against his shoulder, and for that brief moment, no one else in the throne room existed. Cersei made to lunge forward, perhaps to tear Sansa away, but northern guards held her back. Her face contorted with impotent fury. She spat threats, cursing the Starks and raging about how her father, Tywin Lannister, would see them all slaughtered. But there was desperation in her voice, a realization that the fortress had fallen, the city conquered, and her power was gone. In the days that followed, Robb Stark's men imposed order upon King's Landing. They extinguished fires, organized the distribution of food, and forced looters to disperse. Word spread through the city, the king in the north had claimed the capital. Some responded with dread, fearing new oppression, while others dared to hope that a fairer reign might follow. In the Red Keep, Robb set up a provisional command. He placed the boy King Joffrey, Cersei, and a handful of captured Lannister loyalists under guard in the Black Cells. Tyrion Lannister, though confined, was given a small measure of comfort, enough to show that Robb did not intend to slaughter him out of hand. Sansa stayed close to her mother, who had arrived with the last wave of soldiers and found her daughter in an emotional collapse. Lady Catelyn wept with relief to see Sansa alive. But the ache of Arya's absence was a constant thorn in their hearts. Despite the city search, no trace of Arya was found within the Red Keep. The story suggested she had fled the capital after her father's death, but where she'd gone was a mystery that plagued them. Robb was crowned king of the Seven Kingdoms by his bannermen in the Grand Throne Room, though many in the realm would dispute that claim. In practice, he was the man who sat upon the Iron Throne, the victor of a bloody conflict, but the realm's unity hung by a thread. Yet for the moment, King's Landing was his. The small folk came forth with petitions, grievances, desperate pleas for relief after the devastation of war. Robb worked to meet these with as much justice and mercy as possible, striving to honor the principles his father had lived by. Even as he wore a crown of direwolf heads hammered from northern silver, he felt the burden of kingship more than ever. Every choice he made could shape the fate of the realm. Inside the keep, Robb convened a gathering of lords who had supported him: Edmure Tully, Roose Bolton, Rickard Karstark, the Great John, and others who had marched south under his banner. Also present was a new wave of lords from the Crownlands who believed that siding with the victor was their best hope of retaining land and influence. Some pledged fealty immediately, while others were more cautious, uncertain if Tywin Lannister might yet strike back. Robb, however, intended to move quickly. At that gathering, the fate of Joffrey Baratheon and Cersei Lannister was decided upon. The Great John wanted them both put to the sword, displayed before the realm as a token of the North's wrath. Karstark, still grieving his own sons who had perished fighting Lannisters, echoed that sentiment. Roose Bolton, smooth-voiced and cold-eyed, proposed that Joffrey might be kept alive as a hostage to use against Lord Tywin. Lady Catelyn counseled caution, suggesting that a fair trial was needed to show that the new king meant to rule with justice, not simple vengeance. Edmure Tully, gentler of spirit, concurred with her, though privately he admitted he loathed the idea of letting the Lannisters breathe longer than necessary. Robb let them debate, listening to each argument in turn. When silence finally fell, he spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "We are not butchers," he said. "We must show the realm that honor guides us, not cruelty or mindless retribution. I lost my father to an unjust execution. The realm lost its rightful warden of the North, and more than that, a man of integrity. I will not stain my family's name by becoming the very thing I despise." He drew a breath. Joffrey Baratheon and Cersei Lannister will stand trial for the murder of Eddard Stark and for the other crimes laid at their feet. Let all the realm see that we do not stoop to tyranny. The Great John grumbled but bowed his head. Karstark nodded curtly, though it was clear he yearned for Joffrey's blood. Lady Catelyn cast her son a grateful look, relief mingling with pride. And so it was decided. Tyrion Lannister, too, would stand trial, though the charges against him would differ. He was, after all, not the one who had condemned Ned Stark, nor had he apparently condoned Joffrey's cruelty. But as a member of House Lannister, many still saw him as culpable for what had transpired. 2 days later, Robb convened the first hearing in the throne room. The Iron Throne loomed, but Robb refused to sit in that monstrous chair. Instead, he sat on a simpler seat set at the base of the dais, face stern, with his mother on one side, Edmure Tully on the other, and a collection of Northern and Riverlands lords assembled around. Before them stood Joffrey Baratheon, pale and shaking, his wrists bound. A hush fell, broken only by the occasional shuffle of a foot or the murmur of the assembled watchers. A roster of charges was read: the treasonous condemnation and execution of Eddard Stark under false pretenses, the brutal treatment of Sansa Stark, the wanton cruelty inflicted upon the small folk, and more. Joffrey shrieked denials, blaming his mother, blaming Tyrion, blaming anyone but himself. His outbursts only served to deepen the disgust in the room. Robb watched, forcing himself to remain composed, though inside he wrestled with the urge to see Joffrey punished at once. But his father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that justice demanded clarity, not passion. The evidence stacked up. Sansa testified tearfully about Joffrey's abuses, confirming that the Boy King had reveled in her father's death. Several gold cloaks attested to Joffrey's violent orders. Cersei was brought in to confirm or deny these accounts, but she refused to speak, casting only seething glares at those who dared accuse her precious son. When she was escorted away, Joffrey's feigned bravado crumbled. Finally, after hours of testimony and cross-examination, Robb pronounced the verdict. Joffrey Baratheon was guilty of murder and other heinous crimes. The penalty was death. A hush fell over the throne room, deep and resonant. Even the great Jon, who had clamored for a swift execution, seemed oddly somber, as if the gravity of what was about to happen weighed on them all. Joffrey, tears streaming, protested. He pleaded for mercy, threatened them with Tywin Lannister's vengeance, and shrank in fear all at once. But the verdict stood. Robb rose from his seat, feeling the magnitude of the moment pressing on him. "Your father took my father's head," he said, voice echoing. "We Northerners do not forget. And we do not relish cruelty. But justice must be done. And in the North, the one who passes the sentence should swing the sword." Joffrey cried out, struggling in vain as Northern guards dragged him to the courtyard. The Watchers followed, forming a ring around the place where so many had died in the madness of King's Landing's violent episodes. Robb's sword was brought to him, a bastard sword of Valyrian steel that had belonged to his father? No, that sword, ice, was lost. Perhaps melted down by the Lannisters, though he still held on to a faint hope that it might be recovered. For now, he took a sword with a plain, unadorned hilt. He looked at it, recalling how Ned Stark had taught him that the man who passes the sentence must do the deed. That lesson was etched into him like runes on a stone. Joffrey was forced to his knees. He wept, trying to cling to the guard's legs, begging. But no one answered him. The hush was absolute. Robb stepped forward, sword in hand, heart hammering. A swirl of memories threatened to overwhelm him: his father's face, his sister's tears, the day they received the news of Ned's death. He drew a breath, setting his jaw. "In the name of Eddard of House Stark," he said, voice low and steady, "in the name of justice and honor, I, Robb Stark, king in the North and newly come to the Iron Throne, sentence you to die." For a heartbeat, he wondered if he might tremble. But he recalled the steely calm he had felt in battles and let it guide him. He lifted the sword and brought it down cleanly. Thus ended Joffrey Baratheon. A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through the crowd. It was done, an act many in the realm had yearned for, others had feared. Robb exhaled, stepping back. He stared at the still body of the boy who had taken his father's life. A wave of emotion washed over him, not triumph, but a strange emptiness. He handed the sword to a guard and walked away, ignoring the stares that followed him. Some murmured that justice had been served. Others felt a shudder at the memory of the young Boy King's cruelty. And for Robb, though he knew it had to be done, he felt no true victory in the death of a child, even one so monstrous. Yet a corner of his soul felt a glimmer of release. Ned Stark had been avenged. Cersei's trial followed soon after. She displayed more composure than her son, though it was shot through with contempt. She scoffed at the proceedings, proclaiming them a mockery. She claimed that all had been done in the rightful name of the crown, that Ned Stark was the traitor for challenging King Joffrey's rule. Witnesses refuted her. Bit by bit, her complicity was laid bare, not just in Ned's death but in the torment inflicted on Sansa, the mismanagement of the city, the betrayal of the realm's trust. Her guilt was proven as thoroughly as her son's. The hall was solemn when Robb pronounced the verdict, guilty. The great Jon demanded immediate execution, but Robb weighed the matter in his heart. In another age, perhaps the queen might have been sent to the Silent Sisters or locked away in a convent. But the realm had seen enough instability to know that leaving her alive would allow House Lannister a rallying figure. Cersei was sentenced to death, but at Lady Catelyn's discreet urging, Robb decided it would not be by his own hand. He had shouldered enough burdens in that regard. And so, by the sword of one of his loyal bannermen, Cersei Lannister, daughter of Tywin Lannister, mother of the deposed Boy King, was executed before the eyes of King's Landing. She went to her death with a cold, imperious glare, not begging for mercy. When her head fell, a hush lay over the crowd, tinged with fear and an uncertain acceptance that the old regime was truly gone. In the aftermath, the city trembled with the realization that House Stark now controlled the capital. The small folk turned out in droves, hoping for bread, for justice, for change. Robb and his advisors worked tirelessly to stabilize the situation, organizing patrols to halt looting, distributing stores of grain to stave off hunger. They began the process of rebuilding the city's governance, naming new officials loyal to the North. It was an enormous task, and for every measure they took, new complications arose. The crown's coffers were nearly empty. The Lannisters had borrowed from the Iron Bank of Bravos to fund their wars. The city's infrastructure was a patchwork of collapsed buildings, burnt-out streets, and resentful citizens. Yet Robb persisted. He had not chosen kingship for glory. He had been called to it by the savage injustices done to his family. And now that he wore the crown, he felt the weight of the entire realm pressing down upon him. Lady Catelyn stood at his side, advising him, reminding him to think beyond vengeance. Edmure Tully and other river lords offered counsel, as did several northern lords. Some advisors from the Crownlands, seeing an opportunity, tried to ingratiate themselves, claiming they had always despised Joffrey. Robb listened politely but measured them carefully. Loyalty born of convenience could vanish just as quickly. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister, still at large in the west, mustered his forces. The word came that he was fuming at the news of King's Landing's fall. But an army could not be conjured from thin air, especially when the new occupant of the city controlled the crown's official seat. As the weeks passed, Robb received word that many houses in the Reach had broken with the Lannisters, uncertain of how to proceed now that the capital no longer recognized them. Some turned to Highgarden for leadership. Mace Tyrell seemed to weigh alliances, uncertain whether to accept Robb's authority or attempt some new claim to the throne. Dorne stood aloof, as always, biding its time. The Vale, under Lisa Arryn's uncertain leadership, remained closed off, though many whispered that the Knights of the Vale might eventually ride to support the Starks if the cause was just and if certain arrangements were made. Amid these shifting political sands, Robb's days were filled with council meetings, judicial disputes, distribution of rations, and attempts to secure alliances. Sansa remained in the Red Keep with her mother, slowly recovering from her ordeal. She spoke to Robb in halting words about the cruelty she had endured, about the fear that had consumed her. He listened, guilt gnawing at him, wishing he had come sooner. She asked about Arya constantly, tears welling when no new information was forthcoming. Lady Catelyn clung to hope that Arya would one day return to them, though the uncertainty weighed heavily. 2 months after the city's capture, Robb summoned Tyrion Lannister to stand trial. The dwarf wore a resigned expression, though he still carried himself with a hint of wry dignity. The charges against him were lesser: complicity by association in the downfall of Ned Stark, the torment of Sansa Stark, and the defense of Joffrey's regime. But evidence emerged that Tyrion had, in fact, attempted to temper Joffrey's cruelty. He had also tried to negotiate with the Starks multiple times, though overshadowed by his family's crimes. Sansa testified that while Tyrion did not free her, he had shown her some measure of kindness. She did not forget the day he prevented Joffrey from beating her. Even some gold cloaks, under oath, admitted that Tyrion had clashed with the Queen on multiple occasions, seemingly in an effort to limit the worst of the Boy King's outrages. The final twist came when Tyrion declared, "I demand trial by combat." The words echoed in the throne room, sending a ripple through the watchers. If there was one custom that could override the king's authority in such matters, it was the ancient right to trial by combat. Robb's council debated fiercely. Some insisted it was a ploy to avoid a just punishment. Others pointed out that, according to Westerosi tradition, a man had that right, no matter how unpopular. Ultimately, Robb, committed to the principle of fairness his father had championed, allowed it. And so, on a clear, cold morning, Tyrion Lannister's champion faced off against a champion chosen by the court, Ser Wendell Manderly, a knight of House Manderly, strong and skilled. Tyrion, lacking martial prowess, had managed to convince Bronn, the Sellsword who had once served him, to fight on his behalf. That was if Bronn could be found. And found he was lurking in the city, sniffing out opportunities. He strolled into the makeshift arena with an insolent grin, the same man who had won Tyrion's freedom back in the Vale. Ser Wendell was a formidable opponent, broad-chested and skilled with a morning star. But Bronn was quick, cunning, and merciless. In a vicious fight that left both men bleeding, Bronn's blade found a gap in Ser Wendell's armor. The Northman collapsed, life ebbing away on the sand. A hush fell. By the old laws, Tyrion was judged innocent. He stood there, battered but alive, looking half-stunned by his own fortune. Murmurs swept through the northern lords. Some demanded that Robb ignore the results and execute Tyrion anyway. But Robb, mindful of the oath he had taken, mindful that justice must be consistent, allowed the outcome to stand. He had no love for Tyrion, but the law was clear, and he refused to break his word and dishonor all that his father had taught him. Go, Robb told Tyrion, voice cold. But know this, if you stand against the North again, if you conspire to restore Lannister rule or do harm to my family, I will not hesitate to end you. Tyrion nodded, eyes solemn. With little left to keep him in King's Landing, the dwarf slipped away, presumably heading west to face the uncertain wrath of his father. In this way, Robb Stark secured his position in the capital. The Iron Throne, though physically his, did not hold the same appeal to him that it had for so many others. He found the seat cruel, the swords jabbing at one's back as if to remind the occupant of the burdens of power. More and more, he spoke of placing a steward on that throne, some loyal figure to govern the realm, while he returned to the north, the land he truly loved. But for the moment he remained. The realm was in disarray. Tywin Lannister's forces still threatened from the west, and the Tyrells, Baratheons, Greyjoys, and others weighed their own ambitions. The cold winds from the north carried rumors of darker threats beyond the wall, though many in the south dismissed such stories as tall tales. One evening, Robb stood on a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The setting sun cast streaks of fiery orange across the sky. Lady Catelyn stood beside him, Sansa just behind her, silent in her grief for Arya. Grey Wind lay at Robb's feet, watchful. Robb folded his arms on the balcony's stone railing, a pensive look in his eyes. I never wanted this, he said quietly. Never imagined I would sit on that throne, never even dreamed of coming so far south except perhaps to serve my father if he called. But here we are. His mother placed a gentle hand on his arm. You are doing what you must. The realm needs justice now more than ever, and you have shown them you can provide it. You've avenged your father. But the cost, he murmured, gazing at the distant ships. The waters glimmered under the fading light. So many dead. The city in ruins. The realm torn in 2 or 3 or 4. And Arya, he clenched his jaw. We will find her, Lady Catelyn said with quiet determination. She glanced at Sansa, who managed a hopeful nod, though tears glistened in her eyes. Robb forced a small smile for his sister's sake. He knew that as king, he had to project hope and confidence even when doubt gnawed at him. I swear it, he said softly, touching Sansa's hand. We'll bring her home, no matter how long it takes. Sansa leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment the siblings stood united in silent longing for a lost sister, for a father who would never return, and for a childhood that had vanished the moment Ned Stark died on the steps of the Great September of Baelor. In the weeks that followed, Robb took to patrolling the streets of King's Landing incognito, accompanied by a few trusted guards. He wanted to see the small folk for himself, to understand their plight. He walked among the rubble, saw the hollow-eyed children picking through the remains of burnt stalls, the families huddled in corners, the sense of fear that lingered even though the Lannister banners had been hauled down. He ordered the city watch to be restructured, placing northern men of proven fairness in positions of authority, and he condemned any soldier caught pillaging or abusing the locals. His efforts began to bear fruit. Bit by bit, the city breathed easier. Bread prices stabilized as grain shipments arrived from the Reach. Wells were repaired, streets were cleared of debris, and the people whispered that perhaps this new king was not like the others who had sat the throne. Yet rumors abounded that Lord Tywin was gathering a mighty host. Every raven Robb dispatched to the Westerlands came back with troubling news. The old lion of Casterly Rock was forging alliances anew, determined to oust Robb from King's Landing and avenge the deaths of Joffrey and Cersei. The threat of a renewed war loomed large. Late one night, Roose Bolton came to Robb in the Solar, bearing fresh intelligence. Your Grace, Bolton said, his voice velvety smooth as always, our informants suggest Lord Tywin has sealed a pact with the Freys. He offers them great reward for turning on us. They may try to strike at our supply lines up the Trident. And if they unify with Tywin's main force, we could be caught between the city and an army from the west. Robb felt a stab of anger at the mention of the Freys, recalling their grudging alliance at the Twins. He had promised to marry a Frey daughter in exchange for crossing, but that vow had grown complicated. War had overshadowed everything. Even if Lord Walder Frey felt spurned, this was a precarious time to break from the Starks. Still, the old lord was notoriously fickle, and Tywin's gold might sway him. "We must be ready," Robb said grimly. "We'll strengthen our fortifications around the city, ensure the roads are patrolled. If Tywin Lannister dares come to retake King's Landing, we'll meet him. And we'll not give him the advantage." Bolton's pale eyes gleamed. "You might consider a preemptive strike, Your Grace. Take the war to Tywin before he marches on us." Robb hesitated. Part of him wanted to ride out, smash Tywin's army as he had done in previous battles and end this war once and for all. Another part worried about leaving King's Landing vulnerable if he took too many men. He glanced at his mother, who was seated near the hearth listening intently. She spoke up, voice measured. "The realm is weary of war, Robb. If you ride out again, you risk more carnage, more chaos within the city. The small folk might lose faith in this new rule if they think the streets will erupt in violence once more." "So we do nothing?" Bolton asked lightly, one eyebrow arching. "No," Robb responded, a spark of determination lighting in his eyes. "We prepare. We bolster the city's defenses, gather intelligence, and if Tywin comes, we break him on our terms." He paused, searching his mother's gaze, then Roose Bolton's unreadable eyes. "If there is a chance for a negotiated end, we'll consider it, but I doubt Tywin Lannister has any intention of bowing to me. His father's murder, the deaths of Joffrey and Cersei, there was no bridging that blood feud." Days bled into weeks. Envoys came and went. Some from the Reach, some from Dorne, some from the Vale, each with carefully worded proposals seeking advantage in this new power structure. Robb navigated them cautiously, but he found the intricacies of court politics both exhausting and distasteful. The North's directness never prepared him for the subtlety and cunning required at a southern court. Yet he persevered, determined not to let the realm slide into deeper chaos. One brisk morning, a messenger from the Westerlands arrived under a flag of parley. He brought a letter sealed with the Golden Lion of House Lannister. Robb read the parchment in silence, his jaw tightening with every line. Tywin demanded the immediate release of Tyrion, whose fate Tywin had apparently not heard about. He knew only that Tyrion stood trial and threatened to raise the Riverlands if King's Landing did not return to Lannister control. The letter promised no quarter for the Starks or their allies. Robb's response was terse, "Come and see." Even as he wrote those words, Robb felt a pang. The realm had bled enough. But Tywin Lannister would not rest until he reclaimed his family's seat of power or died trying. The stage was set for another grand confrontation, one that would decide if this newly established northern rule in King's Landing could endure. Yet as Robb folded the parchment, he glanced at Sansa, who lingered in the corner, and at his mother, whose eyes were still red from sleepless nights worrying about Arya. He realized, with a weariness deeper than bone, that the war was far from over. Despite the threats, life in King's Landing slowly improved. Harvest shipments from the Riverlands replenished the city's markets. Northern soldiers, though strangers to the city's climate and culture, maintained a more disciplined watch than the old gold cloaks had. Instances of corruption decreased, and the smallfolk began to see that a stern but fair hand rested on the reins of power. Robb's advisors even organized rebuilding efforts for the damage left by the Battle of the Blackwater, employing laborers to restore homes and fortify the city walls. Yet the specter of Tywin's wrath loomed over every endeavor, an ominous shadow that whispered, "War will come again." In quieter moments, Robb walked the castle corridors, seeking the ghosts of memory. He found the courtyard where Sansa told him their father once practiced swordplay. He stood in the spot where, rumor said, Ned Stark knelt before the headsman's sword, tears stinging his eyes as he imagined what had occurred. There, in that courtyard, he made a silent vow to protect the realm his father had died defending, to uphold the ideals of honor and justice as best he could, even if the very throne beneath him was built on the swords of conquered foes. Late in the evenings, Robb sat with his mother and sister, comforting them, listening as Sansa spoke in quiet, haunted tones about Joffrey's threats and Cersei's manipulations. He reassured her that she was safe now, free from their cruelty. But Sansa often woke from nightmares, crying out. She was not the naive girl who had once dreamed of courtly love and handsome princes. The horrors she had witnessed had left scars. Robb could only hope that time and kindness would help her heal. Meanwhile, Lady Catelyn penned letter after letter to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms asking for news of Arya. She appealed to the lords of the Vale, to the Riverlords, to any who might have seen a young girl with the features of House Stark. Replies trickled back, some describing a girl heading north, some a girl traveling with outlaws, each lead contradictory or old. The only consistent detail was that no one had definitive proof of Arya's whereabouts. That uncertain fear gnawed at the Stark family. They had reclaimed one sister, one daughter, but the other remained lost to the chaos of war. And so, day by day, the new regime struggled to forge a future out of the ashes of the old. The people of King's Landing learned to live under the direwolf banners, to bow to the king in the north who now claimed the Iron Throne. They muttered that he was far less capricious than Joffrey, though he remained a distant figure, often preoccupied with letters from the field, with urgent meetings on strategy, with the daily rigors of rule. Yet whenever Robb walked through the city, escorted by a small guard, the small folk bowed not out of abject fear, but out of something resembling respect. He tried not to let that get to his head, for he had seen how easily power corrupted those who wore crowns. If anything, it humbled him further. One morning, as the sun rose over a city that was slowly learning hope, Robb Stark stood on a balcony of the Red Keep, watching gulls circle the harbor. Grey Wind paced behind him, nose testing the breeze. Lady Catelyn came up beside him and laid a hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than anyone could have hoped," she said softly. He exhaled, tension lining his brow. "This city has taken so much from us, Mother. From Father, from Sansa, from—" He shook his head. "And now it's mine to protect. Whether I like it or not." She nodded, her voice turning thoughtful. "Your father always believed in duty. You are honoring that belief, Robb." His blue eyes scanned the bay, imagining the fleet that might one day come, the banner of the lion snapping in the wind if Tywin decided to attempt an assault by sea. Or perhaps it would be the Tyrell rose if they turned their ambitions on the capital. The Seven Kingdoms were fractious, and the only thing that held them together was the occupant of the Iron Throne, for better or worse. Yet Robb drew a breath and stood a bit straighter. "Then I will protect them," he said quietly, though a fire glimmered in his eyes. "The North, the Riverlands, even the city that once scorned our name. I'll protect them all to honor Father's memory. And if Tywin Lannister comes, we'll show him just how fiercely the wolf defends its pack." Lady Catelyn squeezed his shoulder, pride and sadness mingling in her face. For a moment, the wind whispered across the balcony and the gulls cried overhead as though carrying word of the new age to every corner of the sea and sky. This was Robb Stark's city now, and with every beat of his heart, he resolved to do better than the tyrants who had sat the throne before him. He would shepherd the realm toward an era not of blind vengeance, but of justice tempered by mercy. He could never bring back the dead, never undo the crimes that had been committed. But for the sake of those who still lived. For Sansa, for Arya, for the loyal men who had followed him all this way, he would do everything in his power to forge a fairer future. Even as he gathered his strength for the battles to come, he allowed himself a moment of stillness, letting the wind rustle his hair, letting the first golden light of morning wash over the city he had conquered and now meant to mend. Whether fate would grant him the time, whether the realm would accept a northern king, whether Tywin Lannister's revenge would shatter the fragile peace, these were questions for tomorrow. For now, Robb Stark, son of Eddard Stark, king in the north and, by the turn of war, lord of King's Landing, stood with unbowed shoulders, determined and resolute. And somewhere he hoped the spirit of Ned Stark was watching, proud of the son who now carried on the torch of Stark honor, guiding the realm toward a dawn it had nearly forgotten. Robb Stark rose early in the Red Keep, driven from uneasy dreams by a persistent drumbeat of worries and hopes. Though the bedchamber once belonged to kings who ruled by cruelty or cunning, the young wolf's presence here was meant to herald a fairer rule. The faint light of dawn crept across walls adorned with crimson tapestries, relics of the Targaryens and Baratheons, and most recently, Lannisters. A few had been stripped away or burned in the chaos, yet enough remained to remind him that the Iron Throne had centuries of history behind it, rife with ambition and betrayal. He dressed himself in muted tones, donned a leather jerkin bearing the embroidered dire wolf of House Stark, and stepped into the corridor, Grey Wind padding at his side. The dire wolf was a silent shadow in these halls, an ever-present reminder of the North's new authority. Robb nodded to the guards stationed at intervals, men of the North, sworn to him, watchful in their wolf's head cloaks. They saluted, fists to hearts, as he passed. It still startled him sometimes how they called him Your Grace without hesitation. He had been a lord's son, then a commander in war, then, by the will of his bannermen, a king in name. Yet never had he imagined taking the iron through any itself, nor that, in so doing, he would find his father's killer at his mercy. But even with the city nominally under his control, he slept poorly. With every dawn, new challenges arose. The city needed food, coin, justice, and hope. Tywin Lannister, in the west, gathered his bannermen like a storm on the horizon, threatening to retake King's Landing or burn it if it would not surrender. The Freys might desert the Stark cause out of old grudges. And the Tyrells in the Reach wavered, uncertain which alliance would best preserve their power. A war still smoldered, its embers ready to burst into flame. On top of it all, the mere matter of ruling, of rendering judgments, of organizing rebuilding, of binding wounded hearts, felt immense. As he crossed a small courtyard toward the council chamber, he heard the clang of steel from the practice yard. Even in this uneasy peace, men trained for the next fight. Inside the council chamber, the atmosphere was tense. Trestle tables covered with maps dominated the space, and the chairs were occupied by Robb's key advisors. Lady Caitlin sat near the center, her posture composed though fatigue lined her face. Beside her was Edmure Tully, frowning as he reread a raven's message. Roose Bolton sat with that impenetrable calm of his, pale eyes reflecting no emotion. Nearby, the great John Umber paced with restless energy, his broad shoulders nearly brushing the chamber's rafters. Several other lords from the north and the Riverlands were in attendance, along with a handful of minor Crownlands lords who had pledged service after the city's fall. As Robb took his seat, gray winds settled at his feet with a soft huff, claws scraping the stone. Everyone fell silent, eyes on their king. Robb gestured for the meeting to begin. "The phrase are stirring," Edmure said, tapping the letter in his hand. "We have word from Sir Ryman Fry, who claims that Lord Walder has been neglected in the distribution of crown offices. They mention the old marriage arrangement that Robb, your grace, was betrothed to one of Lord Walder's granddaughters. And they hint at possible repercussions." A flicker of annoyance crossed Robb's features. He remembered that day at the Twins, the uneasy pact that granted him passage across the Green Fork. He also remembered the vow he had broken by marrying Talisa Mager in another version of events, though in this timeline he had not married at all yet. Still, Lord Walder Fry was notoriously prideful and easily offended. "Do they mean to threaten us?" Edmure nodded gravely. "They do, in so many words. They're trying to see if House Lannister's gold is worth more to them than your goodwill. Walder Fry is a man who sets his price at coin and blood. We can't dismiss him." Roose Bolton's voice was as smooth as well-tended silk. "Given the Frey's strategic position, they could become a real thorn in our side if they choose Tywin's cause. They block the main route between the north and the south. Our supply lines would be compromised." The Great John let out a snort. "We could crush them with one hand if we muster a proper force." Lady Caitlin pursed her lips. "And feed more men to the slaughter? Turn the Riverlands into a battlefield again? We've shed too much blood already. Perhaps it's better to placate Lord Walder, at least for now, or negotiate a compromise. We need time to secure the realm." Robb leaned forward. He had come to value his mother's counsel, balancing it against his more belligerent lords. "Let's not feed Walder Frey's sense of self-importance by rushing to bend. But we do need to keep him from Tywin's fold. Edmure, draft a reply. Remind Lord Walder that we are grateful for the crossing he granted and that we have not forgotten him. Mention we are prepared to discuss an alliance." The word tasted sour in his mouth, but if it avoided yet another warfront, it was worth entertaining. "We'll see if that settles his discontent. If he wants offices at court, we can find something. But we don't promise him too much." "Understood." Edmure set to drafting some notes. They moved on to discuss the sightings of Lannister outriders in the Crownlands. Skirmishes had flared between them and Robb's patrols, leaving a few dead on each side. Intelligence suggested that Tywin Lannister aimed to test the city's defenses. "He's taking his time," Bolton observed softly. "He wants to intimidate us, drain our resources, and strike when we least expect." Robb listened, brow knit. Though Tywin was a formidable strategist, so was Roose Bolton, and Robb dared hope so was he himself. His father had taught him the lessons of cunning and patience, lessons that had borne fruit in earlier battles. "We'll fortify," he said at last. "Repair the outer walls. Ensure the gates remain guarded. We've gained time with winter approaching. Tywin won't want to lay siege under snowfall. But we must be ready for anything." The Great John rumbled his agreement while Lady Caitlin gave her son a sidelong glance of concern. "And what of the Tyrells?" she asked. For that, Robb had little clarity. The Tyrells had forged alliances with the Lannisters during the war against Stannis, only to see the Lannisters lose King's Landing to the northern host soon after. They had not declared for Robb, nor had they moved against him. Mace Tyrell was, according to rumor, weighing his options. "We sent envoys to Highgarden, but we've had only polite, evasive replies. I suspect Mace Tyrell is waiting to see if Tywin can retake the city. If Tywin fails, the Tyrells will line up behind us. If Tywin succeeds, they'll claim to have remained loyal to the crown. They want to end up on the winning side no matter what." A wave of frustration passed through him. Ruling was not only about swords and steel, but about letters and marriages and negotiations with men whose sole loyalty was to their own power. Yet if the realm was to know peace, he must deal with them. We'll keep lines of communication open, he said, though he disliked the posture of appeasement. Remind them that we reward those who help us keep the peace, and we will not forget those who raise arms against us. Talk continued until midday, and by the time the council concluded, Robb felt a headache forming. While the lords dispersed to carry out their duties, Lady Caitlin lingered. She came to his side and laid a hand on his arm. You carry too much, Robb, she said softly. You need rest. I'll rest when I can, Robb said, though a ghost of a smile twitched his lips, acknowledging her concern. Is there any new word of Arya? Caitlin's expression tightened. No. I have letters from the Vale, from Duskendale, from all across the Riverlands. No one has credible information. If she was in the city before, she's not now. All the whispers say she fled around the time of your father's death. He pressed a hand to her shoulder. We'll find her, Mother. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, before straightening her spine and composing herself. That was Lady Caitlin's way, sorrow buried beneath steel to protect the family that remained. Robb kissed her cheek and promised they would speak again soon. After a quick meal, Robb took Grey Wind and a small retinue to inspect the city's fortifications. They mounted horses near the Red Keep stables and rode along the perimeter, visiting the gates. In the Dragonette area, he noted partially collapsed walls still not fully restored from the damage of Stannis' assault. Masons were at work with mortar and stone, while northern engineers supervised the repairs. Throughout the ride, small folk paused in their tasks to stare at him. Some bowed, eyes guarded or curious. Others scurried away, not trusting any new king in the capital. Robb greeted those he could, urging them to keep faith that peace would hold. He noticed a few children wave timidly at Grey Wind, but the direwolf's size and fierce eyes drove them back. Even so, the rumor was spreading that this new ruler was not like Joffrey. The Gold Cloaks, now a mix of northern watchmen and local recruits, had fewer complaints of corruption, and newly reopened bakeries sold bread at stable prices thanks to shipments from the Riverlands. The city, though scarred, was beginning to breathe again. He ended his rounds at sunset near the King's Gate. Dismounting, he let Grey Wind roam a bit while he walked the battlements. The ramparts overlooked the Blackwater, the wide water tinged orange by the setting sun. Boats bobbed in the harbor, some bearing trade goods from the narrow sea. For a moment, the scene was almost peaceful. Yet the wind carried a chill that hinted at the turning season and the memory of Tywin Lannister's threat. Robb's mind refused to let him forget. War was never far behind. He returned to the Red Keep under torchlight. Night cast deep shadows in the courtyard. Sentries bowed as he passed. In the corridor outside his chambers, he met Sansa. She was quiet, hands folded in front of her, the hint of an anxious line between her brows. Robb, she said softly. Sansa, he replied, trying to warm his voice. You should be resting. You've had another day of difficult memories, no doubt. She managed a trembling smile. I've been reading in the library. I can't bear to be idle. I think of Arya constantly. I remember how she hated being cooped up, how she'd slip away into the streets. Maybe that's what she did. She looked at Robb, eyes glistening. Do you think she's still alive? He hesitated, not wanting to offer false promises. But in his heart he believed Arya was too fierce to be snuffed out easily. I do, he said gently, and we will bring her home. Sansa nodded, tears threatening to spill. Then, with a ragged breath, she changed the subject. I wanted you to know. I heard some of the servants whisper. They say you plan to gather the great lords for a feast to solidify your rule. Do you think it's wise to let them all inside the Red Keep? So many different factions, some of them might still be loyal to the Lannisters. He studied her face, touched by her concern. She had learned caution the hard way. We have to build trust, he said. But don't worry, I'll keep my guard close. No feast will be like that wedding the Freys once tried to stage. He meant it as a light remark, but it landed with a grim echo. Sansa grimaced. Be careful anyway. Then she reached up, hesitated, and gave him a small, shy kiss on the cheek. Good night, Robb. He watched her go, marveling at how much she had changed from the bright-eyed girl who'd once left Winterfell dreaming of golden knights and gallant princes. War had stolen her innocence in a brutal fashion. Now she walked these halls like a wary ghost, haunted by Joffrey's cruelty, uncertain where safety truly lay. He hoped time and gentler days might restore some measure of her lost dreams. When he finally entered his own chamber, the soft glow of candles revealed a tray of supper waiting: cold venison, bread, and some stew. He ate quickly, not tasting much, mind a-whirl with the day's concerns. Grey Wind settled by the door, ears perked. Thoughts of Tywin's mustering army, Walder Frey's gambits, the absent Tyrells, and little Arya lost somewhere in the wide realm flickered through Robb's head. The tapestry of conflicts stretched beyond simple lines of battle. He felt sometimes as if he stood at the center of a web, each thread tugged by a distant hand, each tension threatening the fragile calm he'd established. Yet he refused to be cowed by the scale of it. Ned Stark had taught him that leadership, like courage, was not the absence of fear, but the resolve to do one's duty despite it. He prayed he would do honor to his father's name. That night, sleep came in shards. In his dreams, he heard the howling of wolves and saw the walls of Winterfell covered in snow, as if warning of the deeper winter soon to come. He saw a faint figure, Arya, or perhaps just a girl with a narrow face, running in the darkness. He reached out calling her name, but she vanished. Then came the roar of battle, Lannister lions charging across a moonlit field, swords clashing. He woke with a start, his heart pounding, gray wind nuzzling his hand as if to calm him. Even in slumber, the burdens weighed upon him. At dawn, ravens brought fresh tidings from the west. A Lannister outrider had been captured near Rosby. The letter from Robb's scouts described a man haggard from days in the saddle, bearing sealed instructions from Tywin Lannister. Within those instructions, repeated references to "when the city falls again" set the tone for Tywin's intentions. There would be no quarter for traitors and turncloaks, the letter promised. It was a brazen vow of retribution. Robb read the missive, face stern. Then he passed it around the council, where the great Jon let out a booming laugh, unsheathing a dagger as if ready to march that very second, while Bolton's thin lips curved in a calculating smile. Edmure Tully shook his head in dismay. Lady Catelyn's mouth pressed into a tight line. "He means to break us," she said, voice low. "We mustn't underestimate him." Robb nodded. "We'll send out more scouts. If Tywin tries to move east in force, we'll know." Bolton cut in, voice mild. "If I might suggest, Your Grace, we could also dispatch our own riders to sow confusion in the Westerlands. Strike at supply caravans, sabotage bridges, harass his outriders. A taste of our own cunning might slow him down." Though wary of Bolton's methods, Robb recognized the strategy's merit. "Do it," he said at last. "But keep the bloodshed to a minimum when it comes to the small folk. We're not butchers." He locked eyes with Bolton, whose calm expression betrayed nothing. Meanwhile, the city itself required constant attention. Clusters of refugees still arrived, fleeing the devastation in the countryside. Robb made arrangements to house them, employing some in the rebuilding efforts. The distribution of bread and barley was carefully rationed to prevent chaos. His lords helped as they could, though some sneered at the idea of using coin to shelter commoners. Robb insisted, remembering how Ned Stark would see to it that those under his rule were not left to starve. The principle might slow them financially, but it eased tension in the streets. In the Red Keep's library, Sansa busied herself with transcribing messages to the distant corners of the realm. She had grown proficient with a quill in her forced captivity, and now she found some comfort in setting words to parchment. Lady Catelyn kept up an endless chain of ravens, inquiring after Arya or forging new alliances. The entire fortress bustled with purpose, as though trying to prepare for a storm while also mending the damage of the one just past. One evening, as Robb took a rare moment to pace the throne room alone, he found himself staring at the Iron Throne's twisted blades. The story said that Aegon Targaryen had forged it from the swords of defeated foes, each blade hammered into a seat meant to remind a king of the price of power. The seat was so jagged that many kings had cut themselves upon it. The Targaryens had called those cuts the king's justice. Joffrey, too, had been scratched. Robb, for his part, had refused to sit there more than once. The first time he tried, it had been as uncomfortable as the legends claimed, and the memory of Joffrey crowing there like a half-mad child brought a bad taste to his mouth. He touched a broken blade that jutted from the seat's side. The metal was still razor-sharp, a symbol of the realm's unending cycle of conquest and revenge. He wondered if that cycle could ever be broken. Would the realm always lurch from one war to another, or was there a path to genuine peace? He thought of the North's simpler ways of houses that might feud among themselves but still retain some measure of loyalty. Down here, ambition seemed to loom in every corridor. Even if he survived Tywin's next attack, who was to say the Tyrells or the Greyjoys or some other pretender wouldn't challenge him next? The next morning found him hosting lords from the Crownlands and the Stormlands. They came with petitions and proposals, each wanting to secure a piece of the new order. Some were minor knights who had once served under Renly, some had bent the knee to Joffrey and now claimed they'd always hated him. Robb listened politely, though he had no intention of swallowing every false vow of loyalty. Still, he needed to build a broad base of support, so he doled out small offices and positions, trying to blend caution with generosity. He could sense Lady Catelyn's watchful eyes every time he granted a favor. She, too, knew the perils of buying loyalty from opportunists, but they had little choice. By afternoon, a hush of excitement filled the castle. A delegation from Highgarden had arrived at the city gates. Robb hastened to greet them in the Red Keep's throne room, setting aside the usual formalities. This could be the turning point. Would House Tyrell back him or remain aloof? The visitors were led by Lord Garland Tyrell and Lady Alice Beesbury, both well placed in Mace Tyrell's circle. Garland had a thoughtful air, lacking the pomposity of his father, and Lady Alice was known for her shrewd counsel. They entered the throne room with a cautious dignity, accompanied by an escort of a dozen knights in green and gold livery. Robb noticed Sansa and Catelyn observing from a gallery above. The Greyjohn stood near the dais, arms folded, while Bolton lurked behind him like a pale shadow. Candlelight glinted on the golden rose emblems of the Tyrell retinue. Garland Tyrell came forward, bowing with impeccable courtesy. "Your Grace," he said, voice warm. "My father, Lord Mace Tyrell, sends his regards and wishes to open talks of friendship between House Tyrell and the new occupant of the Iron Throne." Robb inclined his head. "Welcome to King's Landing. We are glad you came." Garland's gaze flicked to the direwolf banners hanging in place of the old lion and stag sigils. "The city has changed hands many times of late. My father hopes to see a more stable peace." Robb led him aside for a private discussion, with Lady Alice Beesbury and a few key northerners in attendance. They settled in a smaller chamber, where the table was laid with wine, cheese, and fruits. Garland took a seat, glancing at the northern men with polite reserve. Bolton offered him a thin smile. The Greatjohn merely grunted. "I'll speak plainly, Your Grace," Garland began once cups were poured. "House Tyrell was bound to the crown through King Joffrey, at least in name. But with Joffrey's removal, many in the Reach are uncertain where they stand. We fed the city after Stannis's defeat at the Blackwater. Then, not long after, your army arrived, overcame the Lannisters, and took the capital. My father weighs the best course for the Reach, for our vassals, and for the realm as a whole." Robb nodded, mindful of the chance before him. "If House Tyrell desires peace, we share that desire. My father was murdered by Joffrey, and the realm suffered under Lannister misrule. We came to set it right, and yes, to avenge my family. But we want more than just bloodshed. We want stability." Garland's expression was carefully neutral. "And if war continues?" "It might," Robb admitted. "Tywin Lannister threatens us from the west. The Iron Islands remain a menace, if they sense an opportunity. The Vale is quiet, but who knows how long that will last. We can't promise an end to conflict by sheer will. But if we stand together, we can shape a new peace. The North, the Riverlands, and the Reach. Enough power to keep Tywin at bay, and to keep any other challengers from plunging the realm into chaos." Lady Alice Beesbury leaned forward, tapping a manicured finger on the table. "We hear talk that the North was ready to break away from the South entirely to form an independent kingdom. Indeed, your men still call you king in the North. How does that align with sitting the Iron Throne?" Robb's throat tightened. The question was fair. He cast a quick glance at Lady Catelyn, who watched from the side. "When the Lannisters executed my father, my lords proclaimed me king in the North out of fury and grief. At that time, we wanted nothing more than to free ourselves from a tyrant's rule. But events pulled us further south until we came to King's Landing itself. The realm is now in my hands, by right of conquest and by the failings of its previous monarch. I can't abandon it. If I retreat north, we leave a power vacuum that will spark more wars. So I seek to restore the Seven Kingdoms as a fair monarchy, not as a tyranny. If the realm will accept me, I will serve. If the lords deem me unfit, I'll step aside for a more suitable candidate, though I'll not surrender the city to the Lannisters again." A hush fell. The Greatjohn frowned, obviously displeased at even the notion of stepping aside. Bolton maintained his aloof demeanor, but Garland Tyrell seemed intrigued, as if weighing Robb's sincerity. "Your Grace," he said, "if House Tyrell were to recognize your claim, we would expect certain considerations. Trade privileges for the Reach, a formal place on the small council, perhaps a royal marriage in time." Robb had anticipated such conditions. If forging a marriage alliance would stave off more bloodshed, it was worth considering, though he felt no enthusiasm for the game of marital bargaining. "We can discuss details, Lord Garland. For now, let us see if we can agree on the broader strokes, a formal alliance, mutual defense, and commitments to supply the city." In exchange, I'll confirm your father's titles in the Reach and ensure Tyrell interests are well represented. And your father's murderer still threatens from the west, Garland noted, swirling the wine in his cup. Tywin Lannister would be the true test of your hold on the throne. Yes, Robb said grimly. Will the Tyrells help us if it comes to open war? Garland's eyes flicked to Lady Alice. A silent exchange passed between them before he replied, we will have to consult with Lord Mace. But it's not unlikely. Then let us begin on that note, Robb said. We can put our scribes to drafting a formal treaty. If your father accepts, we can sign it here in King's Landing. Your men can remain as envoys in the meantime, enjoy the hospitality of the Red Keep. Garland inclined his head. We welcome the chance to see how House Stark governs the city. Perhaps we can be pleasantly surprised, Your Grace. The negotiation continued late into the evening, covering topics from the distribution of tax revenues to the question of whether the royal seat should remain in King's Landing or shift if the North truly separated. Robb avoided committing to everything, but he extended enough courtesy to keep the Tyrell envoys engaged. They parted on amicable terms, with Garland Tyrell promising to send word to Highgarden of a possible alliance. Exhausted, Robb returned to his solar where a moment's respite awaited. Grey winds stretched out near the hearth. Lady Catelyn followed shortly, her brow furrowed in thought. You handled that well, she told him. They may not pledge loyalty outright, but you've given them reason to stay neutral or lean our way. That is something. He nodded, letting out a weary breath. I feel as though I'm playing a game I never asked to play. One misstep and the realm is at each other's throats again. Her eyes were gentle. That's what kingship is, Robb. A game with lives in the balance. Your father had to play it in his own way, though he despised it. He tried to keep his honor intact. She stopped, swallowing, the memory of Ned's downfall looming between them. Robb softened his tone. He was too honorable for this nest of vipers. I can't pretend to be half the man he was, but I'll do my best not to stray from his principles. They sat in silence, mother and son, each battered by the war and the loss of family. At last, Lady Catelyn leaned in and kissed his brow. Get some rest. Tomorrow will bring more battles of words and letters, if not swords. She left him with a candle flickering on the table, documents spread around him. Robb let the silence envelop him, thinking of how drastically his life had changed. He was a man grown, a warrior, a king, yet he felt like the same boy who once climbed the walls of Winterfell. Sometimes he yearned for the simpler days, patrolling with his father, sparring with Jon Snow, listening to old Nan's stories on a cold northern night. Those were gone forever. What remained was duty and a realm in dire need of unity. He slept fitfully again, though his dreams were calmer than before. In them he walked through the godwood of Winterfell, hearing the rustle of leaves in the heart tree. A soft voice whispered half-formed words, something about the cold winds rising beyond the wall. He thought he glimpsed a pale figure, eyes like ice, looming in the gloom. But the vision faded, leaving him with the soft hush of leaves. He awoke with a sense of foreboding, uncertain what it meant, only that something darker than Lannister vengeance might be stirring in the far north. But the immediate threat was enough to consume his waking hours. Days fell into a routine. Robb met with lords, addressed the city's needs, oversaw the training of his men, and exchanged letters with distant houses. Garland Tyrell and Lady Alice Beesbury made a show of enjoying King's Landing, though they politely evaded discussing final terms until they received Mace Tyrell's response. Roose Bolton sent raiding parties west to harass the Lannister supply lines, returning with mixed reports of success. The Great John boasted of how the next time Tywin marched, they would smash him outright. One afternoon, an incident disrupted the uneasy calm. A messenger arrived at the Red Keep, battered and half-dead from a skirmish on the Rosby Road. He carried a frantic letter from a northern outrider commander, describing how they had encountered a sizable Lannister force led by Ser Gregor Clegane, an infamous name in the Riverlands for his brutality. The outriders were ambushed, pinned down, and forced to retreat. Ser Gregor was said to be terrorizing local villages, scouring them for supplies and leaving devastation in his wake. The letter ended with a plea for reinforcements. Robb felt fury well up at the mention of the mountain. Ser Gregor had been one of the most feared enforcers of House Lannister, responsible for war crimes from the Riverlands to the west. I should ride out myself, Robb muttered, fists clenched, as the council discussed the news. We can't let him ravage the Crownlands unchallenged. But Edmure Tully pointed out the risk of leaving the city if Tywin was waiting to bait Robb into an open field. Lady Catelyn, eyes anxious, also counseled caution. You are the king. If you ride into every ambush, we might lose you. The city might lose you. Bolton spoke next, voice measured. Perhaps a strong column of cavalry under a trusted commander could drive Clegane back without jeopardizing your grace. The great John puffed his chest. I'll lead them if it pleases you. I'll put that monster's head on a spike. Robb eyed the hulking lord. Great John Umber was formidable but also prone to recklessness. You have my leave, Robb said at last. Take 1,000 horse, as many archers as you need. Strike quickly and hit Ser Gregor before he can dig in or rejoin Tywin. The great John grinned, savage glee lighting his eyes. With pleasure, my king. The mountain will learn what northern steel can do. He stomped off to prepare. Lady Catelyn caught Robb's gaze, concern flickering. She did not entirely trust the great John's judgment, but she said nothing. The meeting dispersed, and within hours a mounted force thundered out of the city, banners flying. The dire wolf insignia and the raging bear of House Umber fluttered side by side. Robb watched from the battlements as the cavalry crossed the drawbridge, dust kicked up in their wake. He prayed they would succeed, that the realm might be spared more carnage. Yet he knew better than to expect swift or clean outcomes. A squire sprinted up to him, breathless, bearing another letter, this one from Walder Frey. Robb broke the seal and skimmed it, jaw tightening in frustration. The old lord had responded with typical pomposity, complaining of slights and demanding the king's presence at the twins if some wedding arrangement was to be finalized. He also wanted official dominion over certain tracts of land near the Trident, a seat on the small council for one of his brood, and a laundry list of other concessions. It was, in short, extortion. Robb crumpled the letter, fighting the urge to fling it over the battlements. Then he handed it to Edmure, who shook his head. He grows bolder. Or more desperate, Robb said. If he's truly courting Tywin, he'd play both sides like a fiddle until he wrings the most advantage for himself. He sighed. Draft a response. Be tactful, but do not yield too much. Invite him to come to us in the capital instead of demanding I ride to him. If he refuses, that will speak volumes. Edmure agreed, though he muttered under his breath about the phrase arrogance. For the next 2 days, ravens flew back and forth. Lord Walder delayed, made excuses, demanded further clarifications. It was a tedious dance, overshadowed by the more immediate matter of the Grachan's expedition. No news came from the front, and Robb found his anxiety growing each day. He drilled with the men in the yard, venting his tension through sword practice. Even Lady Catelyn's presence did little to soothe him, for she seemed equally worried. At last, after a tense week, a battered outrider returned. The Grachan's force had clashed with Ser Gregor near a small village east of Rosby. The battle had been fierce, the mountain's men well-armed and savage, but the northern charge overwhelmed them. Ser Gregor himself had managed to escape, though wounded. The Great John had burned the Lannister camp, taken what supplies they could, and freed several captive villagers. Crownland peasants hailed them as liberators. Losses had been moderate, with the northern cavalry proving decisive in open combat. Relief coursed through Robb as he heard the details. The Great John had performed admirably, though the mountain still lived. At least the immediate threat in the Crownlands was blunted. But the outrider brought more troubling news. We found evidence that the mountain's men expected reinforcement from the west. Perhaps Tywin Lannister was preparing a larger push. If so, the timing might have been off, or the Grachan's surprise attack had foiled it. Either way, Tywin would be enraged. Within another fortnight, ravens arrived from the west. Robb convened his council in urgent session as he read them. Tywin Lannister has marched from Casterly Rock with a large force, he announced grimly. Our scouts estimate 15,000 men, possibly more, heading east. The Great John slapped a hand on the table. Let him come. We'll meet him in open field and break him. Bolton raised a brow. 15,000 is no paltry force. If we sally out rashly, we could lose everything we've gained. Edmure frowned. If Tywin invests the city, can we withstand a siege? Lady Catelyn looked to her son. Our walls are stronger now, but the city isn't fully repaired. Our defenders are well trained, but do we have enough provisions to outlast a long siege? We'd be relying on supplies from the sea and the Rose Road, and the Rose Road is threatened if Tywin seizes it. Robb tapped a finger on the map. If the Tyrells join us, Tywin won't dare commit to a full siege. He'd fear a Tyrell host pinning him between hammer and anvil. But the Tyrell alliance was still in flux. Mace Tyrell had sent a polite note of acknowledgement, nothing more. Garland and Lady Alice Berry remained in King's Landing, stalling. We can't count on them, Robb said at last. We must assume we face Tywin alone, with the men we have, plus any potential reinforcements from the north or the Riverlands. The Grachan's frustration burned. Then let's muster every man we can, ride out and crush him on ground of our choosing before he reaches the city. That's tempting, Robb admitted. But we risk getting caught if he outmaneuvers us. Tywin is cunning. He might feign a retreat or lead us into a trap. A defeat in open field would leave King's Landing vulnerable. Roose Bolton cleared his throat. We might strike at his supply lines again as we did before. Force him to split his army, whittle down his strength. Yes, Robb said, nodding. We'll harass him. We'll use outriders and small raids to slow his approach. Meanwhile, we'll strengthen the city's defenses. If Tywin arrives at these walls, we'll make him pay dearly. And with luck, the Tyrells might see reason and come to our aid. He turned to Lady Catelyn. Mother, perhaps you can press the Tyrell envoys again. We need a clearer sign of their intentions. She agreed, though with a worried glance at her son. The next days were filled with feverish activity. Men reinforced the walls, stockpiled arrows, repaired catapults. Supply stores were gathered in the Red Keep and outriders rode west to shadow Tywin's march. In the midst of this flurry, an unexpected visitor arrived at the city gates, Tommen Baratheon, Joffrey's younger brother. He was escorted by a handful of Lannister retainers under a white flag of truce. Robb nearly choked when he heard the news. He had assumed Tommen was either in Lannister hands or had fled to the Rock. Now, it seemed he'd been hidden in the countryside or perhaps at a Lannister-friendly keep near the Stormlands. The boy was only a few years younger than Joffrey had been, though a gentler soul by reputation. The guards reported he'd been tearful but polite, asking to see the king in the north as if uncertain how to phrase it. Tommen and his retainers were brought before Robb in the throne room. The child wore a simple tunic with the gold and black Baratheon sigil, though House Lannister's red and gold belt gave away his heritage on that side as well. He had big, earnest eyes, looking frightened yet determined. The retainers were older men, seemingly unarmed, though Robb's guards frisked them carefully. Robb regarded them from the base of the dais, refusing to sit the Iron Throne for this. Sansa and Lady Catelyn stood nearby, along with the great Jon and Bolton. Tommen's voice trembled as he spoke. Your Grace, he said, I've come to beg for mercy for the people of King's Landing. If Lord Tywin attacks, so many might die. I don't want more bloodshed. It surprised Robb to see such earnestness in a boy once overshadowed by Joffrey. You think you can stop Tywin Lannister by coming here? He asked, not unkindly. Tommen hesitated. He is my grandfather, but he cares about our family name more than anything. Maybe if you spare me, if you promise not to harm me, he'll see there's another way. He might not attack. A murmur ran through the onlookers. Was this a child's naive hope or a cunning ploy from Tywin? Lady Catelyn said softly, and what has your grandfather told you, Tommen? The boy's eyes glistened. He says I should be king, not Joffrey. He said Joffrey was misguided. But I don't want to fight or see the city burn. I just want peace. Robb felt a pang of sympathy. He too had once been a boy thrown into a violent game. But the memory of Joffrey's brutality and how the Lannisters had orchestrated Ned Stark's death reminded him to be cautious. Tommen, did Lord Tywin send you here? Or was this your own idea? The boy lowered his gaze. He said I should come and speak reason. He gave me a letter for you. One of the retainers stepped forward and offered a sealed parchment, the Lannister lion on the wax. Robb nodded to a guard who broke the seal and read it aloud. Tywin's words dripped with subtlety, acknowledging that Tommen was the true heir to the Iron Throne if Joffrey had proven unfit. He proposed that if Robb recognized Tommen as king, the Lannisters would discuss a truce and a power-sharing arrangement. The letter reeked of an attempt to outmaneuver Robb's claim, casting him as just a rebel who should kneel to the rightful Baratheon heir. There was no direct mention of halting Tywin's march on the city. Anger flared in Robb's chest. It was a cunning move, present Tommen as an innocent boy, the rightful heir, and hope the realm rallies behind him. If Robb refused and harmed Tommen, it would be a monstrous act that might unite others against the Starks. If Robb accepted, Tywin would use that acceptance to reclaim control. He demands I abandon my kingship, hand the city to Tommen, and place myself under Lannister dominion, Robb summarized, voice taut. Tommen flinched. I didn't know he wrote that, he whispered. I only came to ask for peace, truly. Robb studied the child's face, searching for signs of deception. He saw only fear and a flicker of desperate sincerity. Your grandfather marches with 15,000 men, Robb said. He does not march for peace. Tommen's lip quivered. If you keep me here as a ward, maybe he'll talk. Maybe you can convince him not to attack. The great Jon snorted. Or maybe Tywin uses your presence as an excuse to unleash everything he has. We can't trust him. Bolton's eyes flicked between Tommen and Robb. If we keep the boy alive, we risk giving Tywin a figurehead for his claims. If we harm him, we become the villains in many eyes. Sansa stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. We should not harm him. Tommen never hurt me. He was always kind, kinder than Joffrey. She looked at Robb pleadingly, remembering her own captivity. Lady Catelyn nodded in agreement. He is just a child. We are not the Lannisters. Robb paused, recalling how Joffrey had once brandished Sansa as a hostage, tormenting her. He would not stoop to that. Yet the boy had walked willingly into his city, offering himself. Tywin had to know the risk. Perhaps Tywin believed Robb's honor would stay his hand. Or perhaps Tywin thought the boy's presence would sow confusion among the realm's lords, as many believed the youngest Baratheon was a rightful heir. At length, Robb spoke, choosing each word with care. We will not harm Tommen Baratheon, nor will we surrender our claim. This city is under my protection. If Tywin Lannister wants to negotiate, let him come forward with real terms, not demands that we abandon everything. Until that day, Tommen will remain here as our honored guest. Tommen's retainers shifted uneasily. One dared to speak. Will he be free to roam, your grace? He'll be treated with courtesy, Robb said. Not as a hostage, but as a ward. He glanced at the child. Tommen, you will be allowed the run of the Red Keep, with appropriate escorts for your safety. But you must not attempt to leave the city or send secret messages to your grandfather. If you do, we'll assume treachery. Tommen nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. I promise. I just want an end to the fighting. Robb beckoned to one of his guards. Take him to suitable quarters. Make sure he has food, clothes. We Starks do not harm children. The guard saluted, and Tommen was led away, trailing behind him a swirl of confusion and heartbreak. When the doors closed, Robb let out a slow breath. The eyes of his council lingered on him, some like the great Jon L. Okay, displeased that Tommen hadn't been thrown into a dungeon. Others, like Lady Catelyn, seemed relieved that no darker path was chosen. Sansa exhaled a trembling sigh, remembering all too well how it felt to be used as a pawn. As the days passed, Tommen settled uneasily into the Red Keep. The staff treated him kindly, offering meals and a small retinue of pages and guards. He drifted about like a lost soul, sometimes found gazing at the Iron Throne with a confusion beyond his years. Sansa, in an act of compassion, tried to speak with him when they crossed paths, recalling how once he had giggled at a litter of kittens, all wide-eyed innocence in a dangerous court. But the boy was subdued, aware that his presence here was a wedge between his grandfather and the new king. All the while, messages trickled in that Tywin's forces were drawing closer. They had reached the outskirts of the Rose Road, forcing small skirmishes with Robb's outriders. Some villages burned. The Greyjohn was eager to ride out again, but Robb held him back, not wanting to be drawn into a trap. Each day, the tension mounted, the city bracing itself as if for a siege. Yet no formal negotiations arrived from Tywin, only ravens repeating the same ultimatum: yield the crown to Tommen Baratheon or face destruction. Even Garland Tyrell and Lady Alice Beesbury grew increasingly uneasy, sending urgent letters to Highgarden urging their lord to declare. Robb made sure they saw Tommen wandering the castle, another piece of living proof that the realm's old lines of succession were hopelessly tangled. Lady Catelyn pressed them, if Tywin invests the city, will the Reach truly stand by and watch? The small folk will starve again, the crownlands will burn. Garland's polite mask never cracked. My father weighs many factors, my lady, he would say. We must trust that cooler heads prevail. Yet time was running short. The watchers on the city walls saw smoke rising in the distance from farmland. The next outriders to return reported that Tywin was still mustering, perhaps waiting for additional support from the Freys. The mention of the Freys, never ones to pick a losing side if they could help it, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through the council. Robb sensed the trap closing. Soon, something would have to break. Amid all this, an astonishing raven arrived from the Eyrie. Lisa Arryn, Catelyn's sister, had apparently reversed her years of isolation and was offering friendly mediation in the conflict. She proposed that if Robb recognized her son, Robert Arryn, as the rightful Lord of the Vale with expanded privileges, she might lend the Knights of the Vale to defend the capital. Lady Catelyn scoffed at the letter. My sister does nothing unless it benefits her. She's likely heard that the Tyrells may or may not join you and wants her own share of influence. But to have the Vale's knights on their side would bolster Robb's position greatly, especially if Tywin laid siege. Robb was tempted. We can't spurn her outright. If she truly commits the Vale's cavalry, that could mean thousands of fresh swords. He rubbed his temples. Gods, I feel like I'm juggling knives. The veil, the reach, the phrase, all waiting to see which way the wind blows. Roose Bolton offered a sly remark. We might treat with all of them and see who offers the best terms, your grace. Play them against one another. Robb shook his head. That's not how we do things. My father wouldn't have done that. Bolton's lips curved in a near smile. Your father was an honorable man in a most dishonorable realm. Let us hope it serves you better than it served him. The tension in the chamber rose, but Robb kept his composure. He would rather lose his throne than become what the Lannisters had been. Still, he had to accept the realm as it was. Send a measured response to Lisa Arryn, he said, turning to Edmure. Promise recognition of her son's titles, but don't cede territory. Invite her knights to join us in King's Landing. I won't travel to the Eyrie while Tywin marches. With that, the realm waited, breath held. A hush of dread gripped the city. Markets stocked up, tradesmen boarded windows, and the newly formed city watch readied for the possibility of street fighting if the walls were breached. Lady Catelyn oversaw final arrangements for safe houses where women and children could shelter. Sansa busied herself among them, valiantly trying to comfort those who remembered the horrors of the last siege. Day by day, tension thickened like a gathering storm cloud. Finally, news arrived. Tywin Lannister was on the march again, heading down the Rose Road in force. His outriders clashed with Bolton's raiders, pushing them back. The watchers on the battlements reported dust clouds in the west, entire columns of men moving under the lion banner, unstoppable as a tide. Ravens from the countryside confirmed it. If nothing changed, Tywin would reach King's Landing in a fortnight. Robb called a war council, each lord braced for the worst. So be it, he said, voice resonant with resolve. We wanted to spare the city another battle, but it seems Tywin wants to decide things by steel. We'll meet him at these walls if we must. The men stand ready. The great Jon let out a throaty growl of agreement. Bolton stayed silent. Edmure Tully nodded grimly, hands splayed on a map that showed the roads approaching the city. Lady Catelyn lowered her head in prayer, no doubt recalling the devastation that had claimed so many lives already. The next day, as the city drilled and prepared, a single raven arrived from Highgarden bearing a letter stamped with Mace Tyrell's personal seal. Word spread quickly that Garland Tyrell had locked himself in private with Lady Alice Beesbury to read it. At last, Garland emerged and asked for an audience with Robb. He came to the throne room that evening, his face set in a grave mask. The hall was nearly empty save for a few guards and Lady Catelyn. Robb stood by the dais, his mother at his side. My Lord Tyrell, Robb said, trying to keep the eagerness from his voice. Your father's word? Garland bowed. Your Grace, Lord Mace Tyrell has decided to recognize your rule under certain conditions. He wishes a royal betrothal to bind our houses, yourself, perhaps, or if you have siblings of marriageable age who remain unattached. Robb stiffened at that, but Garland pressed on. Furthermore, the Tyrells wish for a place of permanent influence in King's Landing, a seat on the small council, favored trade with the crown, and certain indemnities. In exchange, House Tyrell will march north from the Reach and join forces with you against Tywin Lannister. A wave of relief crashed over Robb, though he kept his composure. If the Tyrells truly joined them, Tywin might think twice about committing to a siege. Even if he did, the combined forces of the North, Riverlands, and Reach could potentially outnumber him. We can negotiate the finer details, Robb said. But tell your father I accept the principle of an alliance. If a marriage alliance is part of it, so be it. He saw Lady Catelyn's shoulders relax. This might avert a bloodbath at the gates. Garland nodded. We will dispatch riders at once. In a week, maybe less, the Tyrell vanguard can be on the march. Our armies were already partially mobilized. My father only hesitated while he weighed the odds. Robb exhaled. So Mace Tyrell had indeed waited to see if the city would collapse or if Tywin would triumph. Now, with Tywin closing in, Mace must have judged that joining Robb was the better gamble. You'll have safe passage in and out of the city, Robb said. I welcome your counsel in planning the next steps. The sooner your banners arrive, the better. That night, King's Landing hummed with rumors of a Tyrell alliance. Some cheered the possibility of more food from the Reach and the renewed might that could defend them from Tywin. Others feared being caught in the crossfire of two great houses. Yet overall, a sense of guarded hope replaced the previous dread. Sentries continued to watch the western horizon, but they did so with the knowledge that reinforcements might soon arrive. Garland Tyrell and Lady Alice Beesbury penned messages late into the night. Robb, too, wrote a flurry of letters, one to the great Jon, urging him to coordinate with Tyrell outriders if they approached from the south, one to Walder Frey, politely informing him that the king had found a powerful ally and no longer needed to chase scraps with the twins. One to Lisa Aaron, letting her know the Vale's help would still be welcome, though perhaps less vital than before. When dawn broke, Robb stood on a balcony overlooking the city, gray wind beside him. He watched gulls circle the harbor, feeling a surge of cautious optimism. If the Tyrells marched swiftly, they could catch Tywin between their host and Robb's defenses. Perhaps they could force him to negotiate or even defeat him outright. Yet a voice in Robb's head reminded him that war rarely went according to plan. He must remain vigilant, for Tywin Lannister was the realm's most dangerous commander, and the price of overconfidence could be ruin. Still, as the morning sun gilded the rooftops, Robb allowed himself a moment of hope. He had come to King's Landing to avenge his father, and he had succeeded in toppling the Boy King and the Queen who orchestrated Ned Stark's death. Now, a measure of justice was taking root, and a new alliance with the Reach might give him the strength to keep his hold on the capital. If the North, Riverlands, and Reach stood united, perhaps the realm could know peace under a monarch who actually cared about the lives of his subjects. He turned to Lady Catelyn, who joined him at the balcony. She laid a hand on his arm, her eyes reflecting both relief and worry. "Let's pray the Tyrells don't falter. If we can fend off Tywin, maybe the war will truly end." He looked at her, the ghost of a smile on his face. "One step at a time, Mother. Once Tywin is dealt with, we can see about reuniting the realm, or letting the North stand apart if that's what's best. I only wish we could share this moment with Father," he murmured, feeling a dull ache in his chest. "He would be proud," she said, voice thick with emotion. Gray wind lifted his head to the breeze, muzzle twitching. The distant clang of the city's bells drifted on the air, marking the start of a new day. And for the first time in weeks, Robb felt that day might carry promise instead of dread. He closed his eyes and let the warmth of the sun brush his face, silently vowing that, no matter the trials yet to come, he would not abandon his father's legacy or betray the ideals of House Stark. But as the realm had taught him, each day brings fresh challenges. The very next afternoon, outriders galloped into the city with urgent tidings. Tywin's host was only days away, and so far, there was no sign of the Tyrell army. Had the ravens not reached Highgarden in time? Or was Mace Tyrell delaying yet again? Anxiety gripped the capital. Garland Tyrell hurried to the gates daily, scanning the southern roads for signs of his father's banners. Yet the horizon remained empty save for dust and farmland. Meanwhile, word spread that the Rose Road had fallen to Tywin's vanguard, sealing off easy passage from the Reach. If Mace Tyrell meant to help, he'd have to come via a longer route, one that might not deliver him to King's Landing before Tywin arrived. The city, braced for conflict, turned into a tinderbox of nerves. The Great John demanded to sally forth and strike Tywin on the road. Roose Bolton argued that it was safer to remain behind the walls, letting Tywin exhaust himself. Robb listened to his mother's counsel, to Edmure Tully's pleas, to Garland's reassurances that the Tyrells would come. But each day passing with no sign of them chipped at his confidence. Tommen, for his part, wandered the courtyards, accompanied by a few docile guards. He seemed anxious, asking Sansa or any passerby if there was news of his grandfather. "Will he kill everyone?" the boy whispered once to Sansa. "I don't want that." Sansa, haunted by her own memories, could only murmur that she hoped it wouldn't come to that. 2 days later, the watchers on the walls reported a sighting of Lannister banners on the horizon. The dust cloud grew steadily. Tywin had arrived in force, near the same fields where Stannis had once camped. The city braced itself. Banners were raised atop the walls, horns sounded, and archers rushed to their posts. Ballistae and catapults stood ready while the drawbridges were raised. Robb Stark donned his armor, the direwolf etched across the breastplate. He moved among his men, offering quiet words of steadiness. All eyes turned westward. If the Tyrells were to appear, they needed to do it soon. But as twilight descended, Tywin's host encamped out of range, forming disciplined lines on a hill that provided an advantageous view of the city. Their banners snapped in the wind, countless golden lions on crimson fields. Fires dotted the campsite, thousands strong. A hush fell upon King's Landing as people realized the scale of the threat. Distant horns echoed across the fields, a dire promise of war to come. From the ramparts, Robb watched the Lannister encampment with narrowed eyes. Grey Wind stood next to him, hackles slightly raised. Lady Catelyn joined him, a cloak pulled tight around her shoulders in the gathering gloom. "They're waiting for dawn," she observed. "They might send terms," Robb said. "Or they might begin the siege at first light." He clenched his jaw. "If the Tyrells arrive now, we can attack them from 2 sides. But if not..." She took his hand, her voice trembling with concern. "You've done all you can, Robb. This city is as prepared as it can be." He nodded, though inside, tension coiled. He replayed possible strategies in his mind, each hinging on the Tyrell host that might or might not come. The Great John was urging an aggressive sortie. Bolton wanted to lure Tywin into a siege and bleed him. Garland Tyrell was trapped in his own quiet frustration, powerless without his father's army. Meanwhile, the small folk huddled in fear, bracing for a repeat of the last siege's horror. Darkness fell. The Lannister fires gleamed like a field of stars. Every so often a horn blast rippled through the night. The final hours passed slowly. Robb snatched only moments of rest. In his fitful sleep, he dreamed of Ned Stark standing atop the battlements, telling him that winter was coming. Then he saw Arya's face, lost in a swirl of snow. He saw Tywin Lannister, a looming shape crowned by flames, brandishing a golden sword. He woke drenched in sweat, gray wind whimpering softly at his side. Before dawn, horns brayed again. The city stirred in alarm. Robb buckled on his armor by candlelight, heart pounding. He went to the walls, Lady Catelyn and Edmure Tully at his side. There, as the sky began to lighten, they saw the Lannister camp in motion. Men formed ranks, cavalry lined up in neat formation. Siege towers rattled forward on heavy wheels. One could imagine the rattle of chains, the clink of steel armor. The Greyjohn joined them, salivating at the prospect of battle. Bolton's face was unreadable. Garland Tyrell hovered near, dread in his eyes. A figure on a white horse rode out from the Lannister lines, carrying a trumpet banner. Robb signaled for a hush on the walls. The messenger called out in a booming voice, "King Robb Stark, Lord Tywin Lannister invites you to surrender. Yield the city and recognize King Tommen Baratheon, or prepare for war. You have until midday to reply." Then the messenger wheeled around and galloped back, dust swirling. The Great John spat over the rampart. "We should put an arrow through that messenger's back for his insolence." Robb's jaw tightened. "We'll give them our reply soon enough." He glanced south, searching the horizon for any glimmer of green banners. Nothing. They might be days away, or they might have been cut off by Lannister scouts. Or they might have chosen not to come at all, letting the war decide a victor. Tom crawled toward midday. The city was as silent as a tomb. Families cowered behind barred doors. Soldiers manned every parapet. Robb sent ravens to Tywin's camp with the same message: "We will not yield. If you truly want peace, meet us to discuss terms. Otherwise, come and fight." He doubted Tywin would accept a negotiation that didn't end with Robb abdicating. So be it. At midday, horns sounded from the Lannister lines and the army lurched forward. Shield walls advanced, siege towers rumbling, archers forming up. On the walls, northern and river lords readied themselves, bowstrings taut. Then, with a great shout, the Lannisters launched their assault. Arrows whistled through the sky, raining upon the defenders. The city's archers answered in kind. The clash of steel and roar of men erupted like a thunderclap across the fields. Warfare enveloped the western gate, the outer walls shaking under the first volley of catapult stones. Robb ran along the battlements, shouting orders, urging calm. The Great John bellowed, directing men to the hottest spots of the fight. Boiling oil poured down on the siege towers. Crossbow bolts clattered off stone. The stench of pitch and sweat filled the air, mingling with the screams of wounded men. Banners flickered in the haze of dust and smoke. King's Landing had seen this all too recently, and now it faced the same terror once more, albeit under a new regime. In the yard below, cavalry readied in case the gates were breached. Lady Catelyn oversaw triage for the wounded, helping to calm the chaos. Garland Tyrell joined a group of men reinforcing a wall that threatened to buckle under catapult fire. The thunderous impact of stone on stone reverberated. Flames flickered along the ramparts as pitch ignited, sending black smoke swirling into the sky. Within hours, the battle raged in full force. Tywin's men managed to land grapnels on parts of the walls. Northern soldiers hacked at the ropes or flung them aside, but some Lannisters gained footholds, clambering up ladders. The clang of swords rang out, echoing across the battlements. Screams cut through the tumult. The defenders hurled them back time and again, but the pressure was unrelenting. Siege towers crawled closer, bridging the gap to the ramparts with heavy ramps. The watchers inside the city trembled, recalling the horrors of Stannis' assault. Robb fought at the forefront, sword in hand, refusing to let others shed blood in his name while he hid. He and Grey Wind led a counterattack at a section of wall near the King's Gate where Lannister men had established a toehold. The direwolf sprang among them, jaws snapping. Robb's sword flashed, cutting down 2 men as his soldiers followed with roars of defiance. A third man lunged at him, But Robb pivoted, steel ringing, knocking the foe's blade aside. Flames danced across his vision as a brazier was toppled, setting the wooden ramp ablaze. Men screamed, leaping off the ramp as the fire consumed them. He spared no time to dwell on the horror. This was war, savage, chaotic. Another wave clambered up the walls, brandishing grappling hooks. Arrows from below sliced the air, claiming defenders who exposed themselves. Robb pressed on, rallying his men with shouts of, "The North remembers!" He heard them echo the cry, hearts stiffened by memories of the Red Wedding and the fall of Ned Stark. They would not yield. Time blurred in a frenzy of violence. By late afternoon, the Lannisters had gained little ground, though the cost was high on both sides. The city's defenders were exhausted, fighting in waves. Tywin, it seemed, had thrown only part of his force into the breach, testing for weakness. The main body of his army still encircled the city from a distance, preparing for a long siege if necessary. At dusk, the assault slackened. Horn blasts signaled a partial withdrawal of the Lannisters, retreating to their lines with captives and wounded. Robb reeled against the stone parapet, chest heaving. His face was streaked with blood, some his, most belonging to others. Grey Wind, panting, had a gash along his flank, though it did not seem deep. The Great John limped over, one arm bleeding from an arrow graze, his face a wild grin. "We held them off," he roared, half exultant. "But they'll come again tomorrow or the day after." Robb nodded, stifling a surge of nausea at the carnage he'd witnessed. "We'll hold again." He looked over the battlements at the battlefield littered with bodies, battered siege towers, and smoldering wreckage. The moans of the dying echoed in the twilight. War had come to King's Landing once more, and the day's struggle was but the beginning. He sought out Lady Catelyn, who was helping triage in the courtyard. He found her kneeling beside a young soldier, pressing a bandage to his gut. Her eyes were glassy with heartbreak, though her movements were steady. "We lost many," she said simply as Robb joined her. "But Tywin lost more. How many do we have fit to fight tomorrow?" Robb asked hollowly. She glanced at the maesters who hovered nearby. "Most of our men are battered, but we can still man the walls. The real danger is if Tywin invests us for weeks. We have some food, but if the Tyrells don't come soon, we'll be starved out." Robb clenched his fists, frustration flaring at Mace Tyrell's delay. "We can't last a prolonged siege. Our best chance is to hold out until the Tyrells arrive, or to break Tywin in battle before we run out of supplies." He scanned the courtyard, imagining the heartbreak ahead if none came to their aid. Could they attempt a night sortie? A risk too great. At that moment, Garland Tyrell approached, equally bloodied, his posture grim. "Your Grace, we did what we could on the walls, but my men can't hold out forever. My father—" He paused, shaking his head. "He must be en route. I swear the Ravens made it through. He wouldn't abandon me to die in a city under siege." Robb studied Garland's earnest face. He believed the man was sincere, but who could say what truly guided Mace Tyrell's mind? "We'll keep fighting," Robb said softly. "But if your father doesn't appear soon, we may have to sally forth rather than wait to be starved." That evening, Robb convened another war council. The Great John advocated for a night strike, a daring raid on Tywin's camp. Bolton argued it was suicide with Tywin so well fortified. Edmure suggested focusing on strengthening the gates with every beam and iron bar they could find. Garland pleaded patience, confident the Tyrells were close. Robb listened, weighed the council, and decided for caution. A night raid might cost them too many men. They would rest, tend the wounded, and see how Tywin moved on the morrow. If a second assault came, they would hold again. The next day dawned with a crimson sky, as though the gods themselves lamented the bloodshed. Tywin's horns sounded and the Lannisters advanced once more. The city's defenders met them on the walls in a grim repetition of the prior day. Arrows blackened the air, scorpions launched heavy bolts, and catapults lobbed stone. The Lannisters tried fresh tactics, attacking a weaker section of the curtain wall near the mud gate. Robb and the Great John rushed there, rallying the men. The fighting was brutal, with water from the Blackwater Bay lapping ominously at the city's moats. More died, more limbs severed. The clang of steel and the screams of horses merged into a cacophony of suffering. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly on exhausted warriors. The Lannisters managed to erect a siege tower that loomed over the wall. Robb's men lit it ablaze with barrels of pitch, but many defenders fell in the chaos. Grey winds snarled at the swirling smoke, snapping at any Lannister who set foot on the battlements. Limbs trembled, hearts hammered, and still the realm's oldest feud raged on. At last, the horns called retreat again. Tywin's men pulled back, leaving a fresh swath of corpses behind. King's Landing remained in Stark hands, but the victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the knowledge that Day 3 or Day 4 might see the gates sundered or the food stores dwindle to nothing. Night fell on a scene from hell. Fires dotted the ramparts where pitch had burned. The moans of wounded men carried on the wind. Robb stood with Lady Catelyn in the Red Keep's yard, surveying row after row of injured lying on makeshift pallets. "We can't hold indefinitely," he said, voice hoarse from shouting all day. Catelyn nodded, tears brimming as she handed water to a dying soldier. "I know." Just then, a breathless scout rushed in, face alight with something like hope. "Your Grace," he gasped, "there's a stir to the south, banners spotted on the horizon." A large host bearing the Golden Rose. A jolt of adrenaline surged through Robb. "The Tyrells," he breathed. Word spread like wildfire through the exhausted ranks. An army from Highgarden was approaching, hundreds of banners snapping in the wind. The men on the walls cheered even as their voices were cracked and hollow. Garland Tyrell sank to his knees in gratitude. "They made it," he whispered. The next hours brought a tense wait. In the Lannister camp, horns blared and formations shifted. Tywin was evidently aware that another army had arrived. Would he risk a two-front confrontation? The Watchers saw Mace Tyrell's forces array themselves with surprising discipline. Cavalry, infantry, supply wagons all formed in a sweeping line to the south. Morning dawned on the third day of fighting. Tywin's trumpets rang out, but the Lannisters did not charge. Instead, riders flew back and forth between the two armies beyond the city walls. Robb's sentries strained to see. "They're conferring," one said. Tywin must be deciding whether to fight or retreat. Robb and his council raced to the ramparts, scanning the fields. Indeed, the Lannister lines had reformed to face the Tyrell host to the south. The city's gates still stood battered but closed, with Stark men manning them. At last, the Watchers spied Mace Tyrell himself riding forth under a banner of parley, accompanied by a cluster of knights in shining armor. Tywin likewise emerged with a coterie of Lannister lords. They met in the space between the armies, speaking words none in the city could hear. "What are they planning?" the great Jon muttered. "We should sally out and hammer them while they talk." Bolton's voice was mild. "Or let them kill each other. The more their numbers dwindle, the better for us." But even Bolton realized that, in the realm's eyes, Robb needed a decisive statement of leadership. "Open the gate," Robb commanded. "I'm going out to them." A collective gasp arose. Lady Catelyn clutched his arm. "Robb, you can't. It's too dangerous. They could cut you down." "If I don't show strength, Tywin might sway the Tyrells to his side," Robb said, heart pounding. "I must stand as their equal, not cower behind walls. I'll bring an escort and I'll ride under a banner of truce." He mounted his horse at the gate, Grey Wind pacing restlessly. The great Jon insisted on accompanying him, along with Garland Tyrell, who wanted to reach his father. Bolton volunteered as well, though Robb hesitated. Bolton's presence was as unnerving as it might be helpful. Ultimately, Robb allowed it. They rode out under the white banner, crossing the killing fields still strewn with the dead from the past 2 days. Crows flitted about, picking at corpses. The stench of decay clung to the morning air. Ahead, Tywin Lannister waited, regal in crimson and gold armor, flanked by the likes of Kevan Lannister as well as the dreaded Ser Gregor Clegane, bandaged but present. Near them, Mace Tyrell sat astride a massive warhorse, resplendent in green, the golden rose on his breastplate. His vanguard included Randall Tarley, the Lord of Hornhill, and several famous knights of the Reach. Tension rippled in the very atmosphere as Robb Stark pulled up his horse within earshot. He took in Tywin's stern face, the lines etched by decades of rule. They locked eyes, each refusing to yield. The air crackled with old hatreds. Tywin spoke first, voice cold as iron. "King Robb, you've slaughtered Lannister men, executed my grandson, and seized the capital. Now the Tyrells come to meddle. Are you so craven that you hide behind them?" Robb kept his composure, meeting Tywin's gaze. "I do not hide. I'm right here, Lord Tywin. And you marched on the city to destroy all within. Don't speak to me of slaughter." Mace Tyrell cleared his throat, trying to project authority. The Reach cannot stand by while the realm tears itself apart. We come to restore order, Tywin. Stand down or face us as well as House Stark. The city has suffered enough. Tywin's lip curled. You presume I fear Highgarden's might? Randall Tarley interjected stiffly. You'd face 2 great armies, my lord. Is it worth the risk? Kevin Lannister placed a hand on Tywin's reins, murmuring something. Tywin's eyes flicked to Mace, then to Robb. He was outnumbered if the Tyrells truly joined forces with Robb. The city walls bristled with defenders and Mace's army was fresh. Even Tywin's skill might not overcome those odds. At length, Tywin spoke again, voice clipped. You claim to want peace? Then let the boy remove his false crown. Let Tommen Baratheon reign. The Tyrells can support the rightful king. Why do you stand with this northern usurper? Mace Tyrell puffed out his chest. We stand with whomever can best bring stability and prosperity to the realm. Given recent events, we believe King Robb is that man. He paused, glancing at his son Garland, who nodded vigorously. Moreover, Tommen is a child. The realm needs a strong, proven leader, not another boy king. I'm sorry, Lord Tywin, but your cause is lost. A vein pulsed at Tywin's temple. Ser Gregor Clegane rumbled behind him, hand flexing near his sword. Robb tensed, ready for violence, but Tywin held up a gauntlet hand, preventing the mountain from acting. So that's how it is, Tywin said, quietly furious. You choose the wolf over the lion. Very well. I have no intention of kneeling to a boy who styles himself king in the north. Mace bristled. Then lay down your arms and return west. We'll allow you safe passage for the sake of peace. Tywin's cold eyes flicked to Robb. You'd have me leave Tommen in your clutches? I think not. I gave him to you in good faith. You gave him to me as a pawn, Robb snapped. And he's been treated kindly. He lives unlike my father, who died under your grandson's cruelty. For a heartbeat, everyone seemed poised for bloodshed. Tywin's face was stone. Then Kevin Lannister leaned in, whispering urgently in his ear. Tywin's shoulders stiffened. He stared at the combined might before him, measuring the odds. The cost of open battle now would be staggering, a gamble with no guarantee. Even if he could break them, the realm might fracture beyond repair. With an audible sniff of disdain, Tywin turned his horse. We withdraw, he said, voice heavy with bitterness. But this isn't finished. The Lannister name will not suffer such indignities forever. He shot Robb one last venomous glare, then snapped to his bannermen, sound the retreat. Mace Tyrell exhaled loudly, relief mingling with triumph. Kevin Lannister barked orders, horns blowing a mournful note. Like a great beast lumbering away, the Lannister army began to roll back, lifting camp. They would retreat west, at least for now, rather than risk being caught between the walls of King's Landing and the Tyrell host. Robb felt a swell of relief so powerful it nearly unseated him. They had survived barely, but enough. He exchanged a glance with Mace Tyrell, who looked absurdly proud of himself. Then with Garland, who wore a grin of near disbelief. We did it, Garland breathed, voice low. Robb managed a faint nod. They parted ways, Mace leading his army closer to the city's perimeter. Robb and his party rode back through the battered field, among the corpses. At the gates, an astonished hush greeted them. Word spread, Tywin Lannister was in retreat, the siege lifted. As the battered defenders realized they weren't about to face another night of slaughter, an uproar of celebration erupted. Men cheered, hammered shields, and wept. The small folk who had cowered in cellars emerged to throw flowers or ragged hats in the air. The city's bell towers rang out, not in warning but in jubilation. Grey Wind lifted his muzzle, howling at the sky as if declaring the North's victory to the heavens. Robb guided his horse inside, still dazed. The great Jon clasped him on the shoulder, howling with laughter. Bolton gave a shallow bow, the ghost of a smirk on his pale lips. Edmure Tully ran forward, eyes shining with relief, hugging his nephew. Lady Catelyn stood by the gates, tears streaming as she reached up to touch Robb's face. You did it, she whispered. The city is safe. He dismounted, half-stumbling into her embrace. The city roared around them, a thunder of elation. Sansa appeared, her cheeks wet as she took in the news. Tommen was nowhere in sight, likely kept away from the chaos. Robb's limbs felt leaden, every bruise and cut throbbing. But inside, he felt a surge of vindication. They had survived Tywin's assault, thanks to the timely arrival of House Tyrell. As the dust settled, Mace Tyrell led his victorious host into the city, greeted by cheers and uncertain stares alike. The Highgarden banners draped the gates in green and gold. Garland introduced Mace to Robb, a formal greeting between two men who had just decided the realm's fate. Mace blustered about the glory of the day, how the realm owed him a debt for preventing further carnage. Robb, though grateful, also recognized that Mace's demands would not be small. We shall discuss the alliance soon, Robb managed, forcing courtesy. For now, the city thanks you. They organized immediate aid for the wounded. Tyrell healers joined the northern maesters in tending the battered defenders. Mace Tyrell distributed bread from his supply wagons, further endearing him to the hungry smallfolk. Bonfires lit up the squares that night, a spontaneous celebration though overshadowed by the memory of the fallen. Soldiers toasted the young Wolf King and the Tyrell Rose. War might not be over, Tywin still lived and the realm's fractures ran deep, but for this moment King's Landing knew a reprieve. Over the next few days, Robb walked among the wounded, offering words of comfort. He oversaw the funeral pyres for the dead, both Northmen and Crownlanders. Lady Catelyn read prayers as the flames crackled. The stench of burning flesh lingered over the city, a sobering reminder of the cost. Yet each dawn felt a fraction lighter than the one before. Lannister horns no longer terrorized the walls. The people tasted a fragile peace. In the Red Keep, Mace Tyrell wasted no time laying out conditions for a formal alliance. He wanted a royal betrothal, perhaps to his daughter Margaery, a young widow who had once been briefly wed to King Renly. He wanted seats on the small council for his bannermen, new lands in the Crownlands, and guarantees of trade privileges. Robb, though wary of losing too much power, recognized that without the Tyrells, he might have lost the city. So he negotiated with Lady Catelyn and Edmure Tully by his side, forging a treaty that would bind House Tyrell to the new regime. The final arrangement gave them enough to satisfy their ambitions without entirely gutting the monarchy. If Margaery Tyrell wed Robb, it would seal the union between North and Reach, strengthening Robb's claim to rule and giving Mace Tyrell influence at court. The notion of marrying again for politics weighed heavily on Robb's conscience. Once he had yearned for a match of love. But the war had killed that naive dream. Sansa offered him a sympathetic look. She knew too well how marriages could be used as pawns. Margaery might be kind, she whispered. Better than others. Robb gave a tight nod, not entirely comforted. For the sake of the realm, he would do what was required. When the alliance was finalized, a public announcement was made. The city thronged to hear the words. Robb Stark stood on a balcony, the direwolf and rose banners hung side by side behind him. Mace Tyrell loomed to one side, Lady Catelyn on the other. Edmure Tully and Garland Tyrell flanked them. Robb raised his voice, "Hear me, people of King's Landing. The North, the Riverlands, and the Reach are united to preserve peace and order. The Lannisters have withdrawn, though we stand prepared if they threaten us again. We shall rebuild this realm, end the bloodshed that has haunted these streets. And in that spirit I announce my betrothal to Lady Margaery Tyrell to seal the friendship of our houses." Cheers rang out, mixed with some uncertain murmurs. But for many, the vow of peace overshadowed any cynicism. Margaery Tyrell herself appeared in a graceful gown, smiling demurely. She was comely, confident, and had an air of empathy about her. Robb greeted her politely, feeling a tangle of conflicting emotions in his chest. Duty, sorrow for the war, faint hope for a better future. Margaery smiled back as though adept at navigating these formalities. Garland Tyrell beamed at his sister, relieved that their father's ambitions had found a stable foothold. Lady Catelyn, though pensive, whispered to Robb that she was proud of him for choosing the path that might save lives rather than continue an endless cycle of vengeance. Sansa, watching from the side, wore a hopeful smile. Perhaps this queen, if she became queen, would be kinder than Cersei had ever been. In the days that followed, a semblance of normalcy returned to the city. Tyrell soldiers mingled with northern and riverland troops, patrolling the streets, ensuring no pockets of Lannister loyalists stirred rebellion. Traders from the Reach set up stalls, bringing fresh produce and wine. Houses battered by the siege were repaired. The small folk dared to hope that maybe, this time, King's Landing had found a king who would not let them starve or burn. Roose Bolton, the Great John, and Edmure Tully turned their attention to planning the next moves. Should they march west to end Tywin's threat once and for all? Or was it better to let the Lannisters lick their wounds, imposing a sort of cold peace? Robb, warned by the recent bloodshed, leaned toward caution. He had no desire to slaughter more men if peace could be preserved by a show of strength. Let Tywin sulk and Casterly rock, with the knowledge that if he moved again, a coalition far larger than any he'd faced before would stand against him. Meanwhile, Tommen remained in the Red Keep. When Robb visited him, the boy seemed subdued but relieved that no one else was dying. "Will my grandfather come for me?" he asked timidly. Robb knelt beside him, recalling his father's gentle patience with children. "I offered to return you to him if he agreed to talk, Tommen. But he chose to retreat rather than parley. You can stay here as my guest. You'll be cared for." Tommen nodded, eyes distant. "I'm sorry about Joffrey," he said softly. "He was cruel, but he was my brother." Robb didn't know how to respond. He only placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Sometimes the realm is cruel, too. But maybe we can make it kinder. Tommen gazed at him with a mix of awe and sorrow. Neither of them could forget the tragged IES that had led them here. Autumn deepened, leaves drifting in the city's gardens. The talk of White Walkers and wildlings in the far north was dismissed by many in the south as idle rumors, though a few northern lords urged Robb not to forget the wall. He listened, making a mental note that, in time, the realm must address that threat if the rumors were true. For now, the immediate crisis was the Lannisters' threat from the west. Letters came from the Vale and from Walder Frey, each eager to understand the new power dynamic. Lisa Arryn praised the Tyrell alliance, while Walder Frey grumbled that he should have been informed sooner. Robb sighed at those letters, reminding himself that the realm remained a swirling cauldron of rivalries. Victory in King's Landing was only one step on the path. With the wedding to Marjorie on the horizon, the city stirred with a different kind of excitement. Tyrell carpenters, florists, and cooks arrived, determined to put on a grand display of alliance. Robb found the spectacle both exhausting and somewhat surreal. He had never pictured his wedding taking place in the capital his father once loathed. Sansa helped Marjorie choose fabrics for her gown, forging a tentative friendship with the woman who would be queen if Robb maintained his hold on the throne. The small folk, hungry for celebration after so much war, looked forward to feasts and songs. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Mace Tyrell pressed for further concessions. Robb navigated those demands carefully, determined not to become a puppet. Mace wanted to bestow a fancy title upon his daughter, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, but Robb insisted that until the realm was truly united, they couldn't assume such a sweeping title. The negotiations seesawed, but eventually they reached an uneasy compromise. The betrothal would proceed, official yet with certain conditions hinging on Mace's continued military support and Robb's ongoing recognition of Tyrell influence. For the time being, the realm was at peace, an uneasy, precarious peace, but peace nonetheless. The battered Northmen in the city began to write letters home, telling their families they had avenged Ned Stark and secured the capital. The Riverlords rejoiced in the respite from Lannister raids, focusing on rebuilding farmland. The Tyrells spread their influence, forging trade agreements and weaving themselves into the city's daily life. And so it was that, on a crisp autumn morning, Robb Stark stood on a balcony of the Red Keep once again, gazing at the sunrise as it spread gold and pink across the sky. Lady Catelyn approached, her cloak drawn tight. Grey wind slept by the threshold as though finally at ease after so much battle. "You're thinking about father," she murmured, seeing the distant look in his eyes. "Yes," Robb admitted. "And about Arya. About all we've lost. We've reclaimed some measure of justice, but I still feel incomplete. The realm is far from whole." She pressed a comforting hand to his arm. "What we have is hard-won. Treasure it. Use it well. We will keep searching for Arya. And we will keep watch on Tywin. The realm might never be truly whole, there's always some new threat. But for now you've ended the worst of the war." He nodded, letting the early sun warm his face. "It's strange. I took King's Landing to avenge father. I ended up wearing this crown, forging alliances, doing the very things he once tried to avoid. He never wanted power, only honor. I hope he'd understand why I've made these choices." Catelyn's voice was gentle. He would. He knew a lord's first duty is to protect his people. You're protecting the North, the Riverlands, and now the city he once tried to save. There's honor in that. Robb exhaled, a burden lifting somewhat. "I've learned that ruling is more than just swinging a sword or winning a battle. It's about forging peace among those who mistrust each other, about balancing justice with mercy." She smiled through her own grief. "You've done well, my son. Ned would be proud." A distant horn sounded from the ramparts, just a routine changing of the guard. Robb watched the city stir to life, artisans opening shutters, street vendors setting up stalls, the bells of the Great September tolling in the distance. It was a city that had known countless tyrants, yet now it had a chance, however slender, to rebuild under a different kind of king. Somewhere in the swirl of it all was the promise that, if he continued to lead with honor, he might guide the realm away from the dark spiral it had been stuck in. Tywin Lannister had been driven back, the phrase contained, the Tyrells allied, the Vale growing more open to cooperation. The North and Riverlands, though battered, were unified behind him. There would be future challenges, splintered loyalties, the uncertain fate of Arya, rumors of unrest beyond the seas or beyond the wall. But for now, King's Landing belonged to the wolf, and the boy who once only dreamed of knighthood stood at the helm of a realm that needed him. Robb left the balcony resolved to face his new day's duties. He would hold audiences, settle disputes, speak with Marjorie about their upcoming nuptials, and see to the continuing repairs of the battered walls. He would share a meal with Sansa, and maybe, if time permitted, he would look over the old letters his father once wrote, seeking guidance in the words of a man who had embodied honor. Grey Wind followed at his heels, a silent sentinel. As he walked the halls of the Red Keep, he remembered again that it was not by cruelty or fear that he'd taken the seat, but by necessity, and if he had his way, he would rule justly so that no future child would see their father's head on a spike. In the courtyard below, men hailed him as Your Grace, bowing low. He offered them a nod, a half-smile. The last vestiges of youth clung to him in his features, but his eyes were those of a man who had seen too many battles. He stepped past them, shoulders squared, mind braced for the challenges ahead. The day stretched before him, and within his breast burned the quiet determination of House Stark. Winter was coming, both literally and metaphorically. But the city in his care would face that winter with a measure of hope, guided by the boy who had become a king and who would strive at every turn never to lose the soul of the wolf.